Highbridge Audio presents Life on the Other Side, written and read by Sylvia Browne. Part 1, The Other Side, How I Know What I Know. I believe in the other side in the eternity of the soul. I believe our spirits make the round trip from this world to the other side many times, by our own choice to learn and experience for the ongoing advancement of the souls God gave each one of us. I believe that only a thin veil separates our earthly dimension from the dimension of the other side. I believe that the other side is home, where we will all come from, where we'll all go again, and that we will carry very real memories of it in our spirit minds. And I believe it is on the other side, between what we call lifetimes, that we're really at our most alive. Every one of those beliefs is absolute. For some reason, many people assume, and since I was born psychic into a family with a 300-year psychic lineage, that I'm already genetically goofy anyway, and likely to fall for every harebrained supernatural woo-woo rumor that comes along. But the truth is, I was also born in Missouri, the show-me state, into a Lutheran Episcopalian Jewish home, and I attended a Catholic school, which gave me enough theories about the other side and the journey of the soul to keep me perpetually confused if I had simply believed everything I heard without questioning it. Not a chance. I happen to be one of the most naturally skeptical people you'll ever meet, and I'm also addicted to research. My faith in God has always been unshakable, but until and unless I've seen, tasted, smelled, felt, and experienced the details about how the whole creation of His really works, I take nothing for granted and keep right on digging for answers. I'll assume that you're as skeptical as I am and walk you down the 63 years of paths and occasional detours that led me to the truth, so that we all can take the upcoming tour of the other side together with fearless, confident joy. I was born with an inherited, God-given psychic gift in Kansas City, Missouri on October 19th, 1936. Neither my dear daddy, William L. Shoemaker, nor my not-so-dear mother, Celeste, was psychic. The gift skipped that generation and passed directly from my beloved, brilliantly psychic maternal grandmother, Ada Coyle, to me. Grandma Ada was my mentor, my inspiration, and my constant source of assurance that being psychic wasn't really the frightening burden I often found it to be. She used to say, "You're the only one in our family who's ever rebelled against this gift." And she was right. Until I understood it and discovered that I could only use it to help people, it was one gift I would have happily exchanged. Just as a God-given musical gift can manifest itself in a variety of ways, from singer to composer to musician to conductor, the specifics of the psychic gift have varied from one generation of my family to another. Some of us can trance, or step aside to allow a spirit entity to see, speak, and hear through us, while others of us, including Grandma Ada and my psychic son, Christopher, either can't or won't. A few of my ancestors and my amazingly gifted granddaughter, Angelia, have psychokinetic power, which is the ability to manipulate tangible objects psychically. The variations go on, but the bottom line remains the same. Even when we were too young to understand what was happening, the psychics in my family have had countless, undeniable encounters with the other side in some form or another. The majority of my childhood psychic experience were visual. I was 5 years old when, at a family dinner, I saw the faces of both my great-grandmothers melting, as if their skin were slowly running down their necks like lava, leaving nothing but their bare skulls behind. Within 2 weeks they both died, and until Grandma Ada explained psychic visions, I was simply being given a visual form of psychic information. I was convinced that I had somehow killed them. At around that same age, I discovered that I had the disgusting, involuntary ability to see inside people, like a three-dimensional full-color X-ray. Try having a normal childhood when some repairman or family friend stops by and all you see is a diseased liver or tumor-ravaged lung floating through the living room. I couldn't imagine a lifetime of looking at melting faces and infected organs, and I complained to Grandma Ada, the one person who understood. She taught me that just as God gives us this gift, He can help us refine it. Ask Him not to show you anything you can't handle, she said. So I did, and He answered the prayers of a frightened child. The visions kept coming, as powerful and intense as ever, but the images themselves were always more age-appropriate from then on. For example, it was only a few months later, the week before Halloween, when a little classmate of mine named Pam came to the house to show off the paper witch costume she was going to wear that year for trick-or-treat. The moment she stepped in the door, I saw her surrounded by flames, as if she had an aura of fire. I wasn't sure exactly what it meant, but I was sure I preferred that to seeing her completely engulfed in an inferno with her flesh burned and charred. Pam was twirling around the room in full witch regalia when she spun too close to the wall-heating grate, and suddenly her paper costume ignited and burst into flame. Purely on impulse, I threw her to the ground and rolled an area rug around her, extinguishing the fire even before my parents could rush into the room at the sound of Pam's terrified screams. Not only was my psychic vision of her surrounded by flames a bit less violent than the melting faces and diseased organs I'd been subjected to before, and not only did it turn out to be accurate, but I was also convinced it heightened my senses and allowed me to help rather than panic when the vision became a reality just minutes later. What I could handle without panic was seeing spirits, which has been a constant part of my reality for 63 years now. They started with night visits in my early childhood. I'll never forget lying in my bed in the dark watching forms take shape, one after another, until they almost filled the room, as if word had spread through the spirit world that if you want to be seen, there's a party at Sylvia's. They never threatened me, or even paid much attention to me. They just mingled and went about their business until a light came on, at which time they promptly became invisible to my clairvoyant night vision. Again I complained to Grandma Ada, and she calmly handed me a flashlight to take to bed with me. It worked, thank God. To this day, I can't sleep in a completely dark room, because the minute I try it, the room begins to fill up. As a child, it was scary. As an adult, it's just annoying, like having a crowd of uninvited, shadowy guests gather around you every time your head hits a pillow. I can hear you saying, what child doesn't see shadows moving around their bedrooms at night? True enough, it's not that uncommon. What is uncommon is for parents to take their children's night fears seriously. The typical reaction is to turn on the light and say to the trembling child, "You see, there's nothing here. Stop imagining things and go to sleep." But next time you find yourself in that situation with your child, please bear a couple of things in mind. For one thing, my spirit guide Francine, whom I'll properly introduce later, swears that one of the most unfortunate words in the English language is imagination, because it's too convenient an excuse for a lot of incidents that deserve a closer look. For another thing, the most psychic beings on this earth are children and animals. So instead of dismissing what your child claims to see as made-up nonsense, encourage them to tell you all about it and really listen. You'll be surprised at how much they can teach you about the spirit world and the other side if you'll let them. Before long, to my chagrin, I was able to see spirits just as clearly in the bright light of day as I could in the dark. They would blithely mill around in a room full of people, seemingly unnoticed by everyone but me. 2 dimensions superimposed over each other, and both of them equally real. And I finally stopped bothering to ask my parents or my sister, "Do you see that?" The answer was always no. So why reinforce to them and to myself for the millionth time that I was not a normal child? Except when Grandma Ada was around, and I just kept my mouth shut and felt like an alien. It was in the context of all these spirits around me and my curiosity about where they came from that Grandma Ada started telling me about the other side. She said that when life on this earth ends, our eternal spirits leave our body and go home to God in a place of unimaginable beauty, full of colors and music and pure, all-encompassing love. These spirits weren't coming around to hurt me. They were just visiting from the other side, and because of the gifts she and I shared, we could see them when others couldn't. I was 7 years old when the other side became intensely personal for me and changed my life forever. I was in my bedroom brushing my hair, playing with my flashlight, trying to ignore my certainty that someone I couldn't see was nearby watching me. Suddenly, almost blindingly, the light from the flashlight grew and intensified until it filled the room with a pure white glow, and from the midst of the light a woman's voice said, "I come from God, Sylvia. Don't be afraid." If a disembodied voice told you not to be afraid, no matter where it came from, would you just sit there? Me neither. I was out of that room, flying down the stairs, terrified, in search of Grandma Ada. I crashed into her in the kitchen, where she was cleaning vegetables from her victory garden. Sobbing and trembling, I told her what had happened. She held me, stroked my hair, and explained, as if she'd been expecting this. "That was your spirit guide, sweetheart. She's here to help you. Pick up the carrots." As always, Grandma Ada was right. It was indeed my spirit guide, and I've never spent a day without her since. Her real name is Aina, but for reasons no one can quite remember, I immediately insisted on calling her Francine instead. In her one lifetime on Earth, she was an Aztec Inca from a small village in Colombia, killed by a spear in 1520 while trying to protect her child during a violent Spanish invasion. She is my closest friend, my constant companion, my patient confidant, my teacher, my resident expert on the other side, and my infuriating, judicious protector who knows I can't learn without making mistakes. She speaks to me in a voice that's transformed into a high chirping sound as it makes a transition from her dimension to mine. With my permission, she also speaks through me, using my voice while I trance, oblivious to what goes on in my absence until I'm told about it later or hear her on tape. She's 5'9", rail-thin, with elegant long-fingered hands, and waist-length black hair that she wears in a thick braid. She is slow-eyed, and her looks are exotic, almost Egyptian, with her olive skin and huge dark eyes. I didn't get my first actual glimpse of Francine until I was 18 and in college, and when she appeared, I very deliberately closed my eyes and turned away. I majored in education and literature at St. Teresa's College, with a minor in theology, toward my goal of becoming a teacher. I also signed up for hypnosis class at the University of Kansas City. Francine had been chirping away to me on a regular basis for 11 years by then. The Three Faces Eve was a hot, new, must-see movie about a woman with multiple personalities. And as part of my required studies, I was taking a course in abnormal psychology. I had felt abnormal all my life, and now here was a handy textbook that listed the 8 symptoms of schizophrenia, 4 of which might as well have had a little photo of me beside them as far as I was concerned. The more I read, the more I studied, and the more I added things up, the more impossible it became to ignore the obvious. I was crazy. I was also smug when I announced it in my farewell speech to this symptom of my dementia I had known for so many years as Francine. She listened with her usual patience and didn't argue with me, or defend herself even once. But she did ask me to indulge her in one little demonstration before I permanently declared her unreal. For the first time since I met her, she was going to materialize. It was nighttime, raining. My mother, father, and sister were with me, beside themselves with excitement at the prospect of seeing this woman I'd been chattering about for all these years. I, on the other hand, was some combination of scared, anxious, and resigned to the fact that when nothing happened, it would prove beyond a doubt how completely nuts I really was. We dimmed the lights a little, at her request, so as not to hurt her eyes on her first physical trip to this dimension in several centuries, or so she said. And then we waited. But not for long. There was a rocking chair beside me. Slowly, with silent grace, the folds of a pale blue dress took form, draping from the seat of the chair to the floor. Next came a hand, resting in the lap of the soft dress, its fingers long and slender. My father ecstatically blurted out, "Don't anyone talk until she's gone, so we'll know we didn't influence each other about what we saw." No problem. Mother and Sharon were too busy gasping in awe to form actual words anyway. An arm gradually appeared above the hand, with smooth mocha skin, and then resting against it a long braid of thick black hair. That was enough for me. While my family kept watching, utterly enchanted, I turned away and never glanced back. Dr. John Rennick, a psychiatrist who has become one of my favorite teachers and confidant, was surprised at me when I told him the next day about my reaction to Francine's physical debut. He thought I should be thrilled. "I've known all along that you're too strong and well integrated to have any serious psychological problems, let alone schizophrenia," he told me. "But you and your family saw Francine with your own eyes. She's real, which means that you're perfectly sane. Why did you turn away from her?" I don't cry often, but I remember feeling tears on my cheeks. "Because I have to live in this world, Dr. Rennick. I hear and see so much that normal people don't have to put up with. I don't want to be some airy-fairy weirdo. I want to be a teacher. I'm goofy enough. I can't afford to be any goofier." He smiled, looked into my eyes, and said, "What a perfectly sane thing to say." I finally smiled back. I still have a written diagnosis from him. Normal, but has paranormal abilities. Even with the question mark, it meant a lot to me, coming from a highly respected psychiatrist, and at least as a psychic, and I've never questioned my sanity again. Now that I had fully accepted Francine, and at the risk of sounding like an ingrate, I began complaining to her about her high-pitched, chipmunk-like chirp, and asked if she couldn't find some slower, lower octave, less irritating way to communicate. She explained again that she couldn't control the distortion of the sound of her voice as it traveled from her dimension to mine, but for the first time she offered an alternative. If I would trance, she could speak through me using my voice. I wouldn't be aware of anything that was said during the trance, but I could tape it and listen afterward to whatever she had to say. My response was a less polite version of fat chance. I wanted no part of that. Letting a spirit guide occasionally borrow my vocal cords hardly sounded compatible with my determination to keep one foot safely planted in the rational world. She assured me that trancing was risk-free, that it would be very helpful, and that I would never find myself unable to come back and take charge again. I didn't care. The answer was still a resounding no. She started to talk about trying it sometime if the opportunity presented itself, just to give me the experience, but I cut her off, finished with the whole conversation. It happened a few days later in a hypnosis class led by Dr. Royal. My friend Mary Margaret, whom I've known since kindergarten, was with me. I remember being counted down as usual. The next thing I remember was regaining consciousness. I'm double-jointed, so it was particularly graceless awakening. I was still seated on my chair, but I was bent over with the top of my head resting on the floor between my feet. Everyone in the room was gaping at me. Self-conscious and very confused, I sat up and asked what had happened. All of them, including Dr. Royal, talked excitedly over each other. I caught phrases like, "You should have heard yourself," and "so much information," and "where did all of that come from?" And the one that especially caught my attention, "It was like you were someone else." Finally, Mary Margaret leaned close to my ear and discreetly announced, "Francine was here, talking through you." I insisted that there must be some mistake, but Mary Margaret was a close friend who knew me well, and she had been hearing about Francine for years. It wasn't just that Francine had introduced herself to the class while I was gone. The speech patterns, the rhythms, the terminology, everything that came out of my mouth with my voice was so dramatically different from what Mary Margaret knew to be me that there wasn't a doubt in her mind or anyone else's that somehow, as I voluntarily slipped into hypnotic trance, Francine had stepped in and taken my place. And by the way, they loved her and hoped she would come back soon. I was furious. I confronted Francine that night, demanding to know how she could betray me like that. She patiently reminded me that she had told me she would be watching for an opportunity to channel through me, and the hypnotic trance she used to accomplish it was voluntary on my part. So she hadn't really lied to me, nor had she really come in against my will. She just wanted to show me how safe it was for me to channel her, that I could and would always come back, and that it was a perfect way to help her communicate with those who had no other way to hear what she had to say. I have never won an argument with Francine, including that one. She convinced me to give channeling a try. When she talks through me, it's always with my willing permission, and she's been of immeasurable help to countless people. It frustrates me that I never get to hear what she has to say until later, but I have thousands of tapes of her lectures, and agree that, except for the sheer mechanics of my voice itself, she sounds nothing like me. Her speech pattern is very slow and deliberate compared to mine. Her knowledge and vocabulary far exceed mine, and she never says a single word in jest. I was 19 years old when I embraced Francine as a legitimate part of my life, graduated from college, and became, almost as a diversion, a full-fledged licensed hypnotist. I thought it might be a useful tool for helping people stop smoking and lose weight. I never dreamed it would lead me to some of the most remarkable experiences of my life, throw open the door to the other side, and then dare me to have the faith and the courage to step through it. Regressive hypnosis and the other side. My first marriage, for all its flaws, blessed me with my son Paul, and my move from the Midwest to Northern California. There I started doing professional readings, trancing Francine for lectures to countless rapt audiences, and working towards my master's degree at San Francisco University. At SFU, I met Bob Williams, my creative writing instructor, whose influence on my life has been too profound to measure. We used to talk long into the night about the tarot, imagery in James Joyce's Ulysses, metaphysics in general, and inevitably the paranormal. One day he surprised me and my classmates by announcing that Mrs. Dufresne, my married name, will now demonstrate her psychic ability by giving readings to any of you who care to volunteer. There were 50 in the class and 50 volunteered. Thanks to word of mouth, I was never at a loss for clients again. On another day he guided me into a tiny bookstore, pointed out books by psychic healer Edgar Cayce, Madame Helena Blavatsky, philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre and Bertrand Russell, and countless other authors, like you, and told me that my next assignment was to read them all. I already had. He smiled and said, "Then read them again, but this time do something about it. Study, teach, explore new boundaries, exceed your grasp and theirs. Start a research center to attract more people and spread the word. Your work can be even more important than any of these authors, if you'll let it." Bob and I loved each other, and I pointed out the obvious lack of objectivity that would lead him to compare me to the great Edgar Cayce and the others. His response was simple: "I believe in you, just do it. I'll help you." He never got the chance. Despite my premonition that he wouldn't make it back alive, he took off for a trip to Australia. He came home in a pine box. There hasn't been a day in the 25 years since that I haven't missed him, loved him, and thanked him. In 1974, I started the Nirvana Foundation for Psychic Research in Bob's memory. The foundation had two primary purposes: to teach psychic development and to explore and prove the survival of the spirit after death. I registered the Nirvana Foundation with the state of California as a non-profit organization. Then I placed an ad in the local newspaper offering psychic classes. 22 people responded by wedging themselves into my tiny living room on that first Tuesday night. Those 22 told 22, who told 22 more, and finally I had no choice but to scrape together enough money to rent office space in a storefront to accommodate the growing crowds. My parents and sister had moved to California by then, so I promptly hired Daddy and Sharon as part of a staff of 7, and together we improvised to make the Nirvana Foundation for Psyche Research a worthwhile humanitarian effort. I did readings every day and taught classes every night, between Francine's lectures, and still tried my best to be an attentive mother to my 2 young sons. Last but by no means least, I continued my hypnosis studies, became certified, and logged enough hours to earn the status of master hypnotist. I am now licensed to train and certify other hypnotists, and several of my staff members were eager and talented students. I began exploring my curiosity about regressive hypnosis with the goal of taking clients back to their birth into this life. To be honest, the idea of lives before this one wasn't an issue for me. I didn't believe or disbelieve in reincarnation. I just had too many other priorities to give it much thought. So it is an understatement to say I was caught off guard by what happened during a hypnosis session one bleak afternoon shortly after the Nirvana Foundation became a reality. I was doing weight loss hypnotherapy on a new client when he suddenly seemed to lose his mind. First, he talked in the present tense about his life in Egypt as a builder of pyramids. He included some fascinating details about anti-gravitational devices that were so fantastic I couldn't follow them. Next, he launched into a lengthy monologue in what sounded like an endless series of nonsense syllables. I thought he was having a psychotic episode and knew it could be dangerous to him for me to interrupt him. So I listened and tried to appear calm while silently begging him not to become violent. But then, just as suddenly as he flipped out, he snapped right back to his normal, soft-spoken, pleasant self again, as if the previous half hour had never happened. With his permission, I sent a tape of that session to a professor friend of mine at Stanford and asked for his objective evaluation. 3 days after I delivered the tape to Stanford, my phone rang and a voice on the other end said, "Where did you get this tape?" I had never heard my professor friend sound so excited. I responded with a noncommittal, "Why do you ask?" It seemed that in those 3 days he had studied and researched that tape and shared it with his colleagues, who researched it as well. They came to a conclusion that astounded us all. My client's supposed nonsense syllables were really an obscure 7th century BC Assyrian dialect in which any number of pyramid builders would have been fluent. That experience compelled me to expand my this lifetime only regressive hypnosis to any past lives that happened to come up, while never breaking my cardinal rule against leading my clients in any way. I was prepared for past life regression to be a rare phenomena. It wasn't. Not even close. Client after client, eventually numbering into the thousands, after being led gently back through their birth into this life, would begin telling me in great detail about their life or lives before this one. And time after time without fail, the Nirvana Foundation staff would research those details, usually through the invaluable, extensive San Bruno archives, and discover that yes, for example, there really was a woman named Selena Franklin who lived in Peoria, Illinois in 1843, with 2 children named Margaret and Marion and a husband named Willie, who was a wheat farmer. We made note of every past life regression we were able to confirm, and those thousands of confirmations are still on file in my office. The most unexpected and gratifying result of regressive hypnosis was its amazing healing potential. Clients with unexplained phobias and chronic illnesses noticed marked improvements, and in many cases, complete cures once we unearthed the real roots of the problems, buried in subconscious memories of a previous incarnation, just waiting to be exposed and released. That discovery spurred on my research even more. Frankly, Whether it's reincarnation or a purple-spotted giraffe, if it improves people's physical and emotional health, I want to learn everything about it that there is to know. I constantly discuss these developments with several colleagues, including Dr. Bill Yarbrough, a psychology professor at the University of Santa Clara. Like me, he was both a tireless researcher and an open-minded skeptic about past lives. No matter what tape or story or theory I brought him, he never said, "That's ridiculous." Instead, he always sounded intrigued and said, "Let's check it out." I'm eternally grateful, and I do mean eternally. I was absent, in a way, for one of Bill's most remarkable efforts at checking it out. He was very curious about Francine and had attended several of her lectures about theology and the other side, and one day he asked if I would be willing to trance so that he could test her. I was constantly challenging and testing Francine myself, so I welcomed the idea of an outsider I trusted, who I knew respected her, putting her credibility on the line. Without telling me in advance what he had planned, Bill sat down with Francine that night in my office. He had a list of names of 20 former patients, now deceased, randomly selected from hundreds of his and his colleagues' files. One by one he read off the names, nothing more, and asked Francine to identify each patient's cause of death. His theory was that if Francine really was speaking from the other side, she should have access to the information from the deceased patients themselves. But if she was a fraud, she would be reduced to guesswork and fail this test miserably. Francine accurately and in detail identified the cause of death of 19 of those 20 patients. She didn't leave it at a simple gunshot, for example, or even gunshot to the head. She said self-inflicted gunshot wound to the right temple, with an exit wound below the left ear. Bill was blown away. The odds against her guessing 19 out of 20 specific causes of death were astronomical, and he easily ruled out the possibility that she had somehow managed to read his mind. He had carefully avoided even glancing at the causes of death when he wrote the list of names, so he didn't have the information in his mind for her to read. Even subconsciously he couldn't pass her answers he didn't know. The 20th cause of death, the one Francine missed, was a drug overdose. She said there were 3 substances involved. The initial autopsy report said there were 2. Too curious to let it rest, Bill called the patient's family. To his surprise, they had requested a second autopsy, which identified 3 substances, not 2, that combined to end their loved one's life. Bill loved telling that story at lectures and conferences, and he always added the statement that Sylvia makes the quantum leap. I asked him more than once to give that credit to Francine instead, but I never managed to persuade him. Even the most skeptical scientist would be a fool if he or she got the same result from the same experiment thousands of times and refused to accept it. And one thing I am not is a fool. Personally, witnessing thousands of clients' crystal clear memories of past lives and then being able to confirm those past lives convinced me that Francine was right all along, as always. Reincarnation is God's logical, loving, compassionate design for the eternal journey of our spirits. I didn't just want to believe it, I had too much evidence not to believe it. The proof was and is overwhelming that we have all come into this life from the same place, and will all return to the same place when this life ends. The divisions and prejudices we perceive on earth are purely human-made, and will look as ridiculous as they are when we take a long, hard look at them together on the other side. Possibly my most dramatic piece of evidence is that I have the other side on audio tape. I'm not sure I would have believed it myself if I hadn't personally witnessed it the first time it happened. It was 20 years ago. I was doing regressive hypnosis on Susan, a client in her late 40s. The tape recorder was running as always. She was between this life and her previous life on the other side, describing a beautiful domed building with aisles of shelves lined with scrolls that seemed to go on and on to infinity. And you'll hear later, I was very familiar with this building, and I recognized it as a magnificent hall of records. The deeper she went under, the more detailed her descriptions became, the more I realized that I'd become more than an objective observer to Susan's trip to the Hall of Records. I was actually there with her. Shocked and excited as I was, though, I managed to stop myself from saying a word when the realization hit me, so I wouldn't lead or influence her in any way. "You're here with me," Susan announced, surprised. She continued walking us both through the Hall of Records, describing out loud exactly what I was silently seeing right along with her, until we arrived at yet another aisle of scrolls, where I saw a beautiful dark-haired woman in a long blue gossamer dress coming towards us. I knew she was Susan's spirit guide, and I knew her name was Rachel. Susan spoke up. "Someone's with us. It's a woman. She has dark hair. I don't know why, but I have a feeling she's my spirit guide." It was at that instant that Rachel saw us, and she called out, "Susan." Before I could react, Susan gasped, "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" My heart was pounding by now. "She said my name," she replied in awe. But it was nothing compared to the awe we both felt when we played back the tape of that session. At the moment I just described, we heard Susan's voice. "It's a woman. She has dark hair. I don't know why, but I have a feeling she's my spirit guide." And then a third voice, as clear on the tape as Susan's and mine, said, "Susan." I still have that tape and many others on which the voices from the other side have called out to us in this dimension, simply wanting us to notice them and let them serve as absolute proof of the eternity of our spirits. Part 2. Religion and the Other Side. More questions, more answers. You might think that a Lutheran, Episcopalian, Jewish, Catholic girl had to turn her back on a lot of her religious training to reach a point of absolute certainty about reincarnation and the other side. But it wasn't a process of turning my back at all. It was a process of embracing and studying and exhaustively researching, and as a result continuing to grow spiritually to the point where my relationship with God is the unshakable, impenetrable foundation on which everything else in my life is built. In college, I decided I might as well get credit for pursuing my passion, so I chose to minor in theology and world religion. I've always been an insatiable reader, and I now had a perfect excuse to read every religious and spiritual book I could get my hands on. I devoured everything from Harold Bloom's The Book of J to Lane Pagel's series on the Gnostic Gospels to my heroine Eileen Garrett's work, starting with Many Voices, the autobiography of a medium, to Carl Jung, to Joseph Campbell, to Edgar Cayce, to the teachings of Buddha and Mohammed, to the Tantrics, to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, to the Bhagavad Gita, to the Theosophical Society, to the Shinto, to the Rosicrucians, to the Talmud and the Quran. I studied the life of Polynius of Tyrrhenia, a Greek spiritual healer and teacher who was a contemporary of Christ. I learned everything I could about the Essenes or Gnostics, on whom the Catholics and many Protestant denominations base so much of their tenets. I brainstormed with priests, yogis, Tibetan monks, nuns, ministers, rabbis, and Zen masters. I tranced Francine and listened to countless tapes of her lectures on God, theology, and the other side. I promised myself every step of the way not to be too quick to accept or reject any ideology, and to keep going until my confusion gave way to common sense and logic. One of my most eye-opening discoveries was that most of the world's great religions, including Christianity, until it was reconstructed by Pope Constantine in the 6th century, accepted the truth of reincarnation and the internal cycles of the soul between this world and the other side. If that was true, there must be reference to it in the Bible, assuming Pope Constantine couldn't control every single copy of every single translation and get rid of everything he didn't personally happen to agree with. Based on that assumption, I became an eager student of the Bible, all 26 versions of it. My favorite, perhaps, being Lomsa's magnificent translation from its original Aramaic. It's an understatement to say that it changed my life, and that the more I studied, the simpler and less confusing my religious and spiritual beliefs became. Sure enough, it is human beings and their subjective interpretations of God, and not God himself, who cause so much head-scratching among us. I was delighted to find that even in translations of the Bible written after Pope Constantine, 5 or 6 references to reincarnation, and our cycles from here to the other side managed to remain intact. Just one example is Matthew chapter 17. Jesus was talking to Peter, James, and John and said, "Elijah does come, and he is to restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they pleased." Verse 13 reads, "Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist." Now we know that in one of his other incarnations, Elijah was very widely recognized as being Elijah. So obviously, if a time came when they did not know him, it was in a different incarnation, which the disciples understood to be John the Baptist, who was beheaded by King Herod, which is about as clear an example of did to him whatever they please as you could ask for. These quotes are from the Revised Standard Version of the Bible, long after Pope Constantine decided to exclude the concept of reincarnation from Christianity. Once again, as it always does sooner or later, the truth survived. At any rate, at the end, I promised to keep searching for answers that made good, common, logical sense. And while I have the joy of knowing that I will never run out of questions, I found those answers. It took decades of constant study of God and the other side, as they're interpreted by the many beautiful religions of the world. It took decades of readings, with an average of 140 clients a week, and the spirits around them who were eager to talk. My way of condensing, expressing, and celebrating everything I learned through all of that was to found my own church, Novus Spiritus, or New Spirit. Novus Spiritus doesn't exclude, it includes with a very simple principle at its heart. We are all created and unconditionally loved by God, his genetic heirs who are equal in his eyes. There is a mother god, Asna, who is a female, emotional aspect of the deity, just as a father god is a male, intellectual aspect. The mother god is not some knee-jerk invention of the feminist movement of the 1970s. She has been recognized and revered for more than 2,500 years. Throughout our tour of the other side, I'll be using masculine pronouns like he and him to refer to God, but only because I find the constant use of he, she, and him, her as annoying to write as it is to hear. But the truth is, the mother god Asna and the father god make up the Godhead together. God is not mean, unkind, and judgmental ever. Those qualities, like evil itself, are strictly human devices, and they are not the result of God turning away from us, which he never does, but of our turning away from him. The answer to questions like, how could a loving God be cruel to someone who doesn't deserve it? Or, how could he let this innocent baby or this wonderful person die too soon? Is very simple. He couldn't. We each compose a detailed chart of our upcoming lifetime on the other side, before we're born. Everything we experience here on earth, including our hardships and our time of death, are ultimately of our choosing, not his. We are at our most alive on the other side. Our brief trips to this dimension called Earth are a decision we make for the purpose of experiencing and overcoming negativity on our road toward perfecting our spirits for God. Our spirit remembers every birth, death, life on Earth and life on the other side we've been through, and every new lifetime is deeply affected by those memories, whether we're consciously aware of them or not. It is not necessary that you share all of these beliefs as we take the guided tour of the other side together that follows. What do you think is as important as any other question in this audiobook? All I ask is that you keep your mind and heart open and pay attention to any detail that rings some quiet, comforting bell in your soul. I promise you're not imagining things. You're just remembering and yearning for the exquisite joy and beauty of home. Part 3, Death, Our Journey to the Other Side begins. It's a cold, gray afternoon in February of 1987. I'm in my office sitting across from Jane. She's a client. She's in deep hypnotic regression, and I see her body suddenly tense and her face distort with panic. Her slow, rhythmic breath becomes quick and shallow. She cries out, "No! Oh, no!" I keep my voice calm, hoping it will help to calm her. "It's okay, Jane. Just tell me what's happening. What do you see?" "It's dark. I'm in a tunnel. It's too small. I can't get my breath. I don't want to be here." She's crying. I've been through this thousands of times with other clients, and I wish just once it would be easier than this. "Jane, look around. There will be a light soon. Move toward it. Can you find the light?" There's a brief silence before. "Yes, I can see it, but I'm so scared. I want to go back. Please, let me go back." She begins sobbing. "What's happening, Jane?" "I'm moving faster. I can't stop. The light is very bright now. I'm almost there, but it's too bright. I'm too scared. There are hands trying to pull me, strange hands, pulling. It's too tight. Oh, God, I'm out of the tunnel. There's a harsh, glaring light everywhere. I can't open my eyes. I don't want to open my eyes. There are hands, more hands on me. Too much noise, too loud. I'm cold. I'm so cold. Who are these people? I don't want to be here. Please, just let me go back." It's putting her through far too much to let her continue. I quickly, gently bring her out of her trance and assure her that she'll feel a sense of release and well-being when she opens her eyes. She thanks me, but I can still feel a lingering sadness in her as she leaves my office. Once I'm alone, it hits me for the 10,000th time. I'm not interested in doing regressive hypnotherapy for the sheer exercise of it, and not once has the agony of that particular part of regression been of any therapeutic benefit to my clients at all. That settles it. I make a promise to myself. I will never take a hypnosis subject through the nightmare of their birth again. That is not a mistake. In every regressive hypnosis session I've ever done, what causes my clients the most fear, the most depression, and the most spiritual pain is not their deaths in past life, but their birth into this life. If, like most people, the certainty of death frightens you, I can assure you that you already went through something far more traumatic the day you were born. After hearing about near-death and past life death experiences from countless clients, colleagues, and other researchers, you would think my own near-death experience wouldn't have come as such a surprise. But the fact that it was identical to everything I'd heard made it fascinating and almost worth going through. Not that I recommend you deliberately try this at home. I'm just grateful that I consciously remember every moment of it, so that I could offer a first-hand description instead of just hearsay of exactly what dying is like. I was 42 and having routine surgery when I flatlined and encountered the following common events. The tunnel that immediately appeared didn't come from up there somewhere. It actually rose from my body, seemingly from my own etheric substance. Instead of leading up towards the sky, it led across at maybe a 20-degree angle, confirming that the other side isn't some distant paradise beyond the clouds. It really exists right here among us, only 3 feet above our ground level, simply in another dimension, with a much higher vibration than ours. I didn't just feel completely alive as I moved through the tunnel. I was completely alive. Only my body, the vehicle I had traveled in during this lifetime, had conked out. I felt weightless, free, and exhilarated, filled with the peaceful certainty that everyone and everything I had ever worried about would be fine. With my newfound sense of timeless eternity, I knew that my loved ones and I would be together again in what would seem like almost no time at all. The legendary white light appeared ahead of me with sacred brilliance and infinite knowledge. The figure of a loved one stepped into the large opening at the end of the tunnel, in my case, my cherished Grandma Ada. The opening was wide enough that I could glimpse a meadow beyond her, like any grassy, flowered-filled meadow on earth, with its colors enriched and magnified 1,000 times. Obviously, mine was only a near-death experience, and two things happened simultaneously to emphasize that point. When I reached out my hand to Grandma Ada, she reached out her hand as well, but its palm was facing me in a gesture that meant stop. And at that same moment, I heard the faint, distant voice of a friend I'd left standing beside my hospital bed pleading, "Sylvia, don't go. You're so needed." The sensation of returning to Earth made me feel as if a huge rubber band that had been wrapped around my waist and stretched to its limit was now pulling me back. 1 second my hand was just inches from Grandma Ada, and the next second I was snapped back from her and slammed back into the confining heaviness of my body. Not only was I not glad to be back, I felt angry, frustrated, and depressed for days afterward. Looking back, I realized that I couldn't enter that tunnel fast enough. While some people enjoy hovering around their bodies for a while after they've left it, out of fascination with the novelty of watching themselves, of hearing what the other people in the room are saying and doing while they're gone. When and if you find yourself standing by someone's deathbed, you might want to bear in mind that even after their body has taken its last breath, they could easily still be eavesdropping. Moving through a tunnel toward a light isn't the only parallel between birth and death worth mentioning. There's also the cord in each of those processes that nourishes us and connects us to our source. The umbilical cord of birth is very much like the silver cord attached to us below the breastbone that nourishes our spirit with the life force of God's love and keeps us connected to the other side during our brief trips away from home. The silver cord came up frequently in my exhaustive studies of the world's religions and beliefs, including a biblical reference in Ecclesiastes 12:6-7. Before the silver cord is snapped and the spirit returns to God who gave it. But it sounded a little too mystical and unprovable to make much of an impression on me. Even when Francine assured me it was real, I still wasn't quite buying it. Like I said, until I see something with my own eyes, I reserve judgment. Then, of course, I saw the silver cord with my own eyes, and I had to acknowledge for the billionth time that Francine was right again. I was lying on the floor deep in meditation, guided by an eloquent, inspiring, tantric yoga tape, when I came to the disquieting realization that I was having an astral travel experience. I'd left my body and was taking a floating tour of my living room. I saw for the first time and only time in my life a fine silver cord, as delicate as gossamer thread, leading away from my solar plexus to a glittering trail that disappeared several feet away into the thin air of the dimension it came from. There are a handful of exceptions to the spirit journey after the body dies, and we need to explore them to clear up some issues I'm asked about a lot and used to endlessly ask myself until I found the answers. It's important to remember that each of these exceptions is the individual's choice, not God's. And while they are in the minority, they occur too often to be ignored. The first is a journey that results in earthbound spirits, more commonly known as ghosts. A ghost is created when, at death, the spirit either sees a tunnel and turns away, or refuses to acknowledge the tunnel, in the first place, with the result that it gets caught outside of its body between our dimension and the dimension of the other side. Rejecting the tunnel and depriving themselves of the natural journey to the other side creates a delusion that all ghosts share. They have no idea that they're dead. No matter how violent or traumatic their death was, as far as they're concerned, nothing has changed except that suddenly the world in general seems to be treating them as if they no longer exist. Understandably, this makes them confused at best and downright angry at worst. As I mentioned earlier, when I died, if it hadn't been for the tunnel, I wouldn't have had a clue that I was dead either. So I really can sympathize. Imagine waking up in your own home tomorrow morning, in the midst of going about your daily business. A family of total strangers arrives with all their belongings and start unpacking. You plant yourself right in front of them, demand to know what they're doing there, and threaten to call the police if they don't leave immediately. But not only do they pay no attention to you, but they also literally walk right through you from time to time, and maybe perceive you as a cold spot in the room. Eventually, if you're an incredibly good sport, you might resign yourself to the situation and peacefully coexist with these people. If you're not, you could easily start creating as much turmoil as possible to try to get these brazen intruders out of your house. Either way, if you weren't a little peculiar before, a predicament like this would be almost guaranteed to make you that way. So when it comes to ghosts, they deserve more compassion than fear. Being half in and half out of our world, ghosts are a bit easier for us to see and hear than spirits, who have made the transition to the other side and have to change dimensions in order to materialize. I've been investigating hauntings for the past 40 years, and I've met and talked to a lot of ghosts. There is a detailed discussion of my work with hauntings in my book, The Other Side and Back, but I'll capsulize a few encounters here to make a significant point. The two most common reasons why ghosts reject the tunnel and refuse to move on are passion, either love or hate, and fear. A century before mental health facilities were expected to treat their patients humanely, a woman named Coleman locked her husband in the basement of their house to keep him safe when he went insane and took care of him with great love and tenderness until he died. She died soon after he did, and sadly, while he made the transition to the other side immediately, she stays in that house to this day in the deluded belief that her husband is still there needing her. It's rare for a revenge suicide to remain earthbound, as we'll discuss in the upcoming section about suicides, but I have seen it. One client's abusive stepfather had very deliberately lain down on his wife's side of the bed and blown his brains out, knowing that his wife and stepdaughter were on their way home and were guaranteed to be the ones to find him. His passion for control and intimidation kept him in that house for months, frightening and threatening his stepdaughter through what she thought were dreams, until her biological father intervened from the other side to retrieve him from this dimension. Sometimes, obviously, a spirit will reject the tunnel out of love for home or land in which they have a lot of passion or a family history invested. But I have never met a ghost who stayed behind out of an attachment to a car or a piece of jewelry or an article of designer clothing. It's a good lesson in perspective that when we leave our bodies, the material things we've accumulated in our lives become laughably trivial. Whether it takes a year or 100 years, ghosts eventually do embrace the tunnel and the light of the other side. Again, the biggest hurdle is convincing them that they're dead. I was explaining to a particularly ornery ghost once, in a calm, logical manner, exactly how she died and what the signs were that could lead her to a reasonable conclusion that she was dead, including the fact that I was the first person she'd met in years who could see and hear her. And she glared back and demanded, "How do I know you're not dead?" My first thought was defensive, because clearly I'm alive, you idiot. But then I realized that's exactly how she and other ghosts feel when someone says, "Excuse me, but you're dead." So I simply said, "Good question," and changed the subject. It's worth mentioning, by the way, If you or your children are able to see ghosts and spirits with relative ease, there is one very simple tip-off as to which you're looking at. When my son Chris was a small child, he routinely saw and played with spirits and angels, including his spirit guide, Charlie. Since I had similar experiences during my childhood, I didn't give it much thought. One of his favorite spirit playmates was a little boy named Joey, who seemed to have particularly touched Chris's heart. One day I asked Chris to tell me about Joey. In the course of the conversation, he sadly came out with, "Mama, Joey's all burned." That was the day I explained ghosts to my son, and the importance of our loving them enough to encourage them to go home, no matter how much we might miss them. How did I immediately know from that one comment that Joey was a ghost? Because if he were a spirit visiting from the other side, there would have been no burns or injuries on him at all. I'm happy to report that between Chris and me, we were able to urge Joey safely to the light, and my son understood and loved him enough to be joyful as he said goodbye. No spirit is exiled from the other side throughout eternity, no matter how hard they might try. Not even the spirits who make up another exceptions to the divine journey through the tunnel. These spirits choose to turn away from God and, devoid of his loving light, live on the dark side. The dark side are Earth's true sociopaths, remorseless, immoral, valuing no life but their own. They see the rest of humanity as a vast sea of pawns to be played with, used, manipulated, and in some form or other destroyed. Their destruction might be actual murder, or it might take the more insidious form of physical, emotional, or mental abuse. But the only way darkness can survive is to extinguish light, so the dark side feels entitled to whatever destruction they resort to. The dark side are the criminals, in the eyes of the law, or simply of decent society, who can't be rehabilitated. Rehabilitation implies that the person started out habilitated, or had a social conscience to begin with. Among the dark side, nothing could be further from the truth. It would be convenient if the dark side would segregate itself, or wear matching outfits, or be born with horns and little pitchforks. But sadly, they're everywhere, looking like everyone else. They can enter your life as a parent, a child, a sibling, a spouse, a boss, a friend, a lover, or even a political, religious, or spiritual leader you sincerely believe has the best interests of humanity at heart. The dark side can make themselves sound like God's closest personal friend if they think it will help disarm you. The truth, though, is that the dark side rejects God so completely that his constant unconditional love has no impact on them. It is without question the most tragic, unrequited love there is, with the most tragic, long-lasting consequences. When a person on the dark side dies, their spirit never experiences the tunnel and the sacred light at its end. Instead, they immediately go through the other side's left door, or as my 6-year-old granddaughter Angelia says, mean heaven. Inside the left door is an abyss of dark, godless, empty, joyless, all-encompassing nothingness. The only permanent residents of this abyss are faceless beings in hooded cloaks, who have become the archetypes for the scythe-bearing death figure and other characters of utter hopelessness throughout art and literary history. These beings function as a council, overseeing the paths of the souls who make a brief appearance in their presence. And the soul's time in the abyss behind the left door is very brief, because unlike those spirits on the other side who can choose when and whether to return to earth for another incarnation, left door spirits travel straight from their bodies at death through the godless darkness they've chosen, and right back into utero again, on a self-inflicted horseshoe-shaped journey that leaves them as dark at birth as they were at death in their previous life. In other words, taking Hitler as a perfect example of the dark side. The instant he died, his spirit traveled through the left door and entered the womb of some unsuspecting woman who is probably still wondering to this day where she went wrong as a parent, when the truth is, the dark course of this child's life was already determined before it was born. So if there's someone in your life from the dark side whom you're convinced you can change for the better with enough love and patience, please remember that you're fighting a perpetual soul cycle that makes spiritual progress impossible, and that's a fight you can't win. Every living spirit, including those on the dark side, is a child of God and loved by Him unconditionally, whether that love is returned or not. And God will not allow any of His children to be doomed to the dark side's horseshoe cycle for any eternity. Just as the spirits on the other side eventually bring ghosts home, they also, in an act of courage and compassion that may take hundreds of years, will finally manage to catch a dark spirit in that moment before it reaches the left door and absorb it into the healing peace of God's light where it belongs. The holding place. It is a cruel myth that anyone who commits suicide is eternally doomed. In general, suicide is a broken contract with God. Suicides motivated by cowardice, by an insatiable greed for attention, or by a mean spirit I'll show you revenge, especially if there are children involved in any way, are guaranteed a trip through the left door and right back into utero with no peace between lifetimes, or in rare cases they remain earthbound, trapped in the consequences of the nightmares they cause for those they leave behind. But suicides caused by mental illnesses, untreated genetic chemical imbalance, or the grip of paralyzing, abject despair can take different routes. There are suicides who absolutely make it safely through the tunnel to the joy of the other side. And then there is the holding place. The holding place is kind of an anteroom to the godless darkness behind the left door, separate from it, but too close to be completely isolated from its pervasive negativity. The residents of the holding place are the heartbroken, heartbreaking despair suicides, and those other spirits who spend their lives on this earth in that vast gray area between the dark side and the divine light of God. Their behavior toward themselves and the rest of humanity reflects the confusion of their faith in and relationship with God. The desolate souls in the holding place can still make a choice about whether to proceed on through the left door and horseshoe back for another incarnation, or to move on to the other side. The key, as always, is God. Death is the only beginning of a whole new life, and the tunnel is simply the vehicle that delivers us there. Leaving a discussion of the other side with a trip through the tunnel would be like booking a fabulous journey to some exquisite locale, but never asking your travel agent what, if anything, you have to look forward to after you walk off the airplane. Part 4, after the tunnel, arriving on the other side. The reunion that takes place when we arrive on the other side is one of the most ecstatic events we ever experience. The spirits at home are alerted that we're on our way, when, as Francine describes it, our light begins blinking. The light of God we each carry inside of us that acts almost literally as a pilot light to keep our soul illuminated, our own eternal torch. Not only can the spirit world see these blinking lights, but they can also tell which particular blinking lights indicate that people they know are coming, so that they don't dash to greet every Tom, Dick, and Harry who shows up. Instead, the initial reunion is a breathtaking wealth of familiarity. Deceased loved ones from the life we've just left are there to meet us, as Grandma Ada was for me. But there are also friends and loved ones from every one of our past lives, both on Earth and on the other side, most of whom we haven't seen since we left home for this most recent incarnation. Also waiting for us on the other side, almost without exception, are our soulmates. You may have heard me bristle on this subject before, but for those who haven't, I'll be glad to explain why the many misunderstandings about soulmates upsets me. Each of us was created with both male and female aspects, and in fact experienced lifetimes in both genders. We were also created with a kind of identical twin, this spirit whose male and female aspects are mirror images of our own. That spirit twin, is our soulmate. Our soulmate is not, as some suggest, the other half of us, unless you're comfortable believing that we're all just a bunch of half people wandering around. In any given lifetime, our soulmate is not even necessarily the gender we sexually prefer. So it's a myth to assume that, on the off chance you run into your soulmate here on Earth, the two of you are destined to be lovers or spouses. And it really is an off chance that you and your soulmate will choose to incarnate at exactly the same time anyway. Why would you even bother to make a point of it, since you have an eternity together on the other side? And even there, you are hardly dependent on each other or joined at the hip. Once a reunion celebration is finished, most of us are escorted by our spirit guide to a magnificent domed, pillared, Romanesque building called the Hall of Wisdom. It's located just beyond the tunnel, the first building we see when we arrive. You've heard the saying, all roads lead to Rome? Similarly, all tunnels lead to the Hall of Wisdom. Its entrance is stunning, graced with vast marble steps, brilliant statuary, and fountains, sweet-smelling flowers in constant and impossibly beautiful bloom. Inside the Hall of Wisdom is a gigantic room surrounded by pillars. Our guide leads us to one of the many smooth, white marble benches, and then steps back while we take our seat and begin a process that many near-death survivors recall, but few remember in precise detail. The scanning machine. The words, "my whole life," flash before my eyes, have become almost a light-hearted euphemism for a close brush with death. But the truth is, that's exactly what happens on the other side, in the quiet stillness of this sacred room in the Hall of Wisdom. At the center of the room, amid the circle of marble benches where we're seated, lies the scanning machine, a huge convex dome of pale blue glass. And inside that glass dome, we watch all the events of our life play out before our eyes, almost like a movie, but in three-dimensional hologram form, so that no matter where we move around the dome, we can see every movement, good and bad, right and wrong, high and low, with perfect clarity. I still remember my first conversation with Francine about the scanning machine and my skeptical, doesn't reviewing our whole lives take an awfully long time? She does get tired of having to remind me that time is an earthly obsession. In the reality of home, there is no time. The scanning machine is an essential step in the eternal process of our spirits. We'll discuss this in depth later, but when we leave the other side for another incarnation, we arrive here to overcome specific challenges and accomplish specific goals, and we compose a detailed chart for our upcoming lives to help us realize those purposes. As we experience the scanning machine, we have the benefit of total recall of the chart we wrote, in an atmosphere where there is no negativity, and the very air we breathe is infused with God's unconditional love and understanding. Viewing our lives not through our earth eyes, but through our spirit eyes of complete, honest fairness means they aren't just watching what we did from a new point of view, we're also watching the people around us with the compassion insight we might not have offered them at the time. That's a critical point because of who it is that judges the life we've just completed. It's not God, and it's not our spirit guide. It's us. We judge ourselves, our triumphs and failures, our humanity or lack of it, our acts of kindness and selfishness, our moments of courage and cowardice, and above all, how successfully we accomplished the charted goals that made us choose to leave home in the first place. It's the toughest judgment we could be subjected to, because just as there is no negativity on the other side, there is also none of the ego-driven defensiveness and self-justification that prevents us from facing the truth of our actions while we're on Earth. Our spirit guide, who was with us every step of the way through the lifetime we're reviewing, will comfort us throughout the difficult process. But ultimately, the final verdict about our success or failure is ours. Oddly, it doesn't seem to be the big mistake we made that linger most prominently in our thoughts, but the times when we extended ourselves a little, when we knew we could have done more. The friend in pain to whom we paid a moment of passing attention, but were too busy to visit and embrace with compassion. The elderly stranger with too many shopping bags we pleasantly said hello to without offering to carry their packages to their car. The lost child in the mall we worried about, but didn't stay with until he was safely with his parent again. The stray pet we braked for, but didn't take the time to check their tag and take them home. Or the charity we didn't give that extra $20 to because we might want to spend it on a movie later. It is on the sobering occasion of leaving the scanning machine that we begin considering the possibility of returning to Earth to try again. And because its impact on us is so profound, it's all the more important that we experience the next step in our return to the other side. Orientation. The experience of the scanning machine is immediately followed by the equally essential process of orientation. It's during orientation that we discuss the lifetime we've just reviewed, in kind of a debriefing, decompression meeting with our spirit guide, trained orientators, and other spirits whose input can give us the perspective and insight we need to fairly evaluate what we've learned. Let's say, for example, that there's someone you hurt terribly and repeatedly during your life, and the scanning machine has left you devastated by your own actions. The orientators and your spirit guide, with the benefit of having your chart in front of them, can help you see how and if that troubled relationship and any others were crucial parts of your progress, or if it indicates a lesson you need to go back and learn. In addition, you can call in any person, if they're also on the other side, or their spirit guide if they're not, to find out what kind of impact your behavior had on them. Maybe you did serious damage for which you'll want to make amends. Maybe you weren't as important to them as you thought, and they weren't affected by your treatment of them one way or another. Maybe you triggered them to behave badly toward other people and perpetuated a cycle of damage that you can now work together toward stopping. Or maybe you were essential to their chart, inspiring them to become advocates for the victims of whatever form of abuse you subjected them to. One way or another, this part of the orientation process will give you total understanding of the most troublesome parts of your life, so that you can learn, make amends, and take positive steps towards forgiving yourself and moving on with greater love and compassion. Another function of orientation is to facilitate the transition to the other side for those spirits who are unprepared for the trip and are too confused or annoyed to be at peace when they first arrive. Not everyone is as lucky as I was and exhilarated about going home, but orientation is one of the ways in which the spirits there are ready and impeccably trained to help. After the unprepared spirit experiences the scanning machine and the debriefing afterwards, they're given the kindest and most insightful counseling by their orientators to quiet their confusion and lingering frustration, followed by as much time as they need doing activities that brought them comfort on earth. My father died after months of illness, but even with plenty of warning, his transition home was difficult and required more intensive care than orientation provides. And of course the spirits on the other side are ready, willing, trained, and loving enough to give him and those like him all the extra care they need through a process called cocooning. In the cocooning process, the spirit is put into a restful, healing, twilight sleep and receives constant care and a steady infusion of God's compassion, peace, and kind, empowering love. The spirit awakes with the joy of being home, not separated from those missed on earth, but just separate from the grief of missing them. If you suspect a deceased loved one might not have been emotionally prepared to go home, or you don't sense them around you as quickly as you're yearning for, please try to be patient, and don't worry. Whether they're going through orientation or being cocooned, they're in safe, sacred hands, and they'll be around you again very soon. The towers. Among the most stunning structures on the other side are the towers. The towers serve a purpose for a special category of newly arrived spirits from Earth. Spirits whose circumstances at death were too extreme for orientation or cocooning to efficiently help and heal them. Spirits who arrive on the other side desperately confused, disoriented, or deranged from dire situations beyond their control can't experience the peace and joy of home until they've been deprogrammed and guided back to their rightful sanity and identity. POWs who died in captivity after being brainwashed and tortured, many of the Holocaust victims, several of the women who were burned at the stake during the Salem witch trials, torn as they were between a love of God and a constant accusation that they were evil. Joan of Arc, in fact, some of the most severe casualties of Alzheimer's and other diseases that deeply affect the mind. Really anyone unable to understand where they are because they were deprived of an external force of understanding where and who they were when they died is taken immediately to the towers by their spirit guide, and very often a close loved one who stay with them throughout their recovery. The deprogramming process on the other side is a sophisticated version of the deprogramming process on Earth. The finest therapists provide gentle, constant treatment, and very often the spirit guide, loved one, and therapist will recreate the spirit's birthplace, childhood home, or some other site of familiarity, safety, and love, while the treatment continues for as long as it's needed to acclimate the spirit to being home again, with total recall of its identity, the lifetime it just completed, and the lives that preceded that one, so that its eternal, joyful journey can continue intact. Part 5. What does the other side look like? Don't you get a little tired of hearing that the other side is more beautiful than you can imagine? Or if that will somehow help us picture it? First of all, if it's more beautiful than we can imagine, why bother trying to imagine it? Second of all, with a vague description like that, no wonder it's tempting to think that maybe the other side is really nothing but a pretty fairy tale after all. The truth is, the other side is exquisitely beautiful, but we don't have to imagine it any more than we have to imagine our own hometowns. Its stunning images are indelibly etched in our spirit memories. We all came from the other side. We're returned there many times between lives, and will joyfully live there again when this life ends. And believe it or not, we're all so homesick for the other side that every one of us travels there astrally during sleep, at least 2 or 3 times a week. We just don't consciously remember it. The other side is not some mythical place out there somewhere. It is really right here among us, a mere 3 feet above our ground level. It is also a perfect mirror image of Earth's natural topography. Our 7 continents, our mountain ranges, plains, and deserts, our oceans, seas, and rivers, our forests, jungles, islands, foothills, and every other work of nature on Earth all exist in their original perfection on the other side, because there is no erosion, pollution, or destruction there. The mountain ranges are as sharp and soaring, the bodies of water are as pure and azure blue, and the coastlines are as ruggedly intact as they were thousands and thousands of years ago. On the other side, where time does not exist, where every living thing always was and always will be, nothing ages, nothing rots, nothing corrodes, every square inch of land and water is magnificently, eternally new. That includes Earth's 2 lost continents. Atlantis thrives in the ocean on the other side that corresponds to our Atlantic, and in their Pacific lies the huge flourishing continent of Lemuria. The familiarity of home isn't limited to natural wonders. Many of the human-made wonders on Earth actually existed on the other side first, and were subconsciously remembered and recreated here. It is no coincidence that such breathtaking marvels as the pyramids, the Sphinx, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Great Wall of China, and the Taj Mahal grace the landscape of the other side, as uncompromised as if they were just completed this morning. The Parthenon is intact and lovingly tended. The original Venus de Milo and all other great works of art over the centuries which were so beautifully duplicated here have not been even slightly touched at home by the cruelty of vandals, thieves, wars, time, or the elements. Even the Greco-Roman style of architecture was originated at home and then lovingly paid tribute to on earth. In fact, as we'll see shortly, the first buildings that greet us beyond the tunnel are built in that classic style we associated with here, with graceful, understated grandeur. There is no precipitation on the other side, no rain, snow, sleet, or hail. There is no wind stronger than an occasional gentle breeze, no heat waves, no cold fronts. Instead, the weather there is an eternally calm, clear 78 degrees. I once asked Francine, why is it 78 degrees? She answered, because it is. I quietly say, oh, a lot in my conversations with Francine. The sun, moon, and stars are not visible on the other side, and day and night do not exist. The light there is a constant blend of soft, reassuring pastels, like the frieze frame of the quiet rosy violet of Earth's most vibrant summer dawn or dusk. Each of the 9 continents, our existing 7, plus Atlantis and Lemuria, is divided into 4 quadrants. They are simply designated areas for specific purposes on the other side. One quadrant, for example, might be devoted to research, another to animal husbandry, and still another to the creative arts. The quadrants are no more conspicuous or segregated from each other than, for example, our time zones on Earth, and we move freely on the other side from one quadrant to another to explore the variety of interests and responsibilities we happily choose for ourselves back home. And speaking of animal husbandry, almost all the animals that exist on Earth thrive and are cherished on the other side. Aggression is unheard of there, so natural predators do not exist. Instead, the animal kingdom lives in the same aura of safe, perfect peace as the rest of us. That includes everything from dinosaurs and pterodactyls to griffins and unicorns, which brings up a very interesting point. Many animals we lazily categorize as mythological are as real as we are at home. The spirit minds of our subconscious remember them, while our conscious minds dismiss them as too improbable. Our stubborn, short-sighted, finite conscious minds tend to win those arguments. But because our spirit minds invariably know the truth, notice that the popularity of supposedly imaginary unicorns and other mythological beasts never diminishes in the slightest. Back to quadrants, though. As I said, each of the 9 continents is divided into 4 quadrants, and each quadrant is devoted to a specific purpose. We all move freely among the quadrants, spending more time in some than in others, as our own personal interests and duties dictate. But there is one quadrant that is more familiar to us on Earth than any other, and that children in particular enjoy astrally traveling to in their sleep, because it reminds them most of the home they so recently came from. This quadrant houses what could be called the hub of the other side, the cluster of main buildings, so to speak, that greet us when we first arrive, and that we return to often during our lifetimes there. The hub on the other side. No matter where we die on Earth, each of our tunnels leads to exactly the same entrance on the other side. This entrance is in the quadrant that geographically corresponds to the west coast of our North American continent, and it's there that our spirit guides, angels, and other loved ones come to joyfully welcome us home. The first building we see when we emerge from the tunnel is a vast, pillared hall of wisdom, where the scanning machine resides. Our reunion with our loved ones takes place at the foot of the massive steps that lead to its exquisite double doors, and it is inside the Hall of Wisdom's marble walls that we re-enter our lives on the other side. The Hall of Records. To the immediate left of the Hall of Wisdom is the Hall of Records, one of the most fascinating and popular buildings on the other side. Like the Hall of Wisdom, its architecture is classic Greco-Roman, with towering marble columns and a breathtaking dome that soars above the surrounding countryside. The Hall of Records, as its name suggests, contains every historical work ever written, including those whose originals have been destroyed on Earth, from the libraries of Alexandria to the brilliant tomes lost with the continents of Atlantis and Lemuria, to the sacred Akashic records that are the best described as a written memory of God. It only hints at the vastness of the Hall of Records to add that it also contains every detailed chart of every incarnation of every one of our lives on Earth. I've astrally visited the Hall of Records many times, and it never ceases to take my breath away. Endless aisle after endless aisle, each aisle filled with endless shelves, each shelf filled with very real scrolls, in perfect condition and order, on which all of our charts are preserved for eternity, in impeccable, scripted Aramaic, the universal language in which we're all fluent on the other side. We can study our own charts at our leisure in the Hall of Records to give context and perspective to our soul's journey. We can also study the charts of the loved ones we've left behind on Earth, to answer any question we might have about the time we spent with them, and to track exactly what's going to happen to them until we see them again and why. It's also very useful to explore the chart of someone we couldn't seem to get along with in our own recent lifetime, to understand what purpose they serve for us, what purpose we serve for them, and very possibly what past life conflicts the two of us were still working on that drew us together. The Hall of Justice. To the immediate right of the Hall of Wisdom sits the beautiful Hall of Justice, the hollowed structure where the council convenes. We'll discuss the council in detail later, but for now we'll simply acknowledge them as the revered and distinguished elders who play a key role in our lives, both on the other side and during our lifetimes on Earth. The Hall of Justice is pillared, domed, and classic Greco-Roman, just like the other two halls that complete the triumvirate of buildings that immediately greet us on our arrival back home. But its most cherished feature, and the one most often commented on by people who remember the details of a near-death experience, is its endless, achingly beautiful gardens. The entrance to the Hall of Justice is graced by a treasured statue of Asna, the Mother God. Revisiting the Towers. The Hall of Records, the Hall of Wisdom, and the Hall of Justice are the first buildings to greet us on the other side. Directly behind them rise the towers, two identical structures, tall and really contemporary in architecture, reverent monoliths with massive facades of white marble and blue glass. Waterfalls whisper down the walls, misting the jasmine that scents the air around them, and promising the exquisite serenity that waits inside their etched golden doors. The towers again are essential for those new arrivals who need intensive psychological and emotional care for their safe transition home, but they're also deeply appreciated by the locals as perfect sites for solitude, study, and meditation. Two lesser-known structures rest side by side beyond the towers. They are not a part of our homecoming, nor are they included in our daily routine on the other side, and yet they're cherished and essential for nourishment of our spirit. The Hall of Tones. When each of our souls was first created, we were given our own individual mantra, a specific word or series of syllables, to which our spirit will eternally resonate. If we think of our spirits as brilliantly crafted, one-of-a-kind musical instruments, our mantras are the tuning forks that keep our instruments in perfect pitch and tone with the God who conceived them. Every mantra starts with which is a word of affirmation and assent, followed by a tone that is typically made up of 2 syllables. Mine is Shireen. Lindsay's is Curie. Neither of us lit up with instant recognition at the sound of our mantras. Apparently and sadly, their divine resonance gets drowned out too often by the noise of our conscious minds here on earth. But on the other side, our mantras are as familiar to us and as singularly ours as our direct genetic lineage to God. And to keep ourselves in perfect pitch with Him and maintain the purity with which we were created, we make occasional joyful trips to the Hall of Tones to meditate and chant our mantras. Essentially, this keeps the instruments that are our essence exquisitely tuned. The Hall of Voices. Beside the Hall of Tones, to its right, stands a structure reserved for one of the most reverent privileges our spirits will ever experience, a divine encounter with a sound so transcendent that it has never been heard on earth, as if its joy is too great to be contained by just one dimension. We'll discuss angels at length, but for now we need to focus on one of their many unique qualities, both on the other side and during their appearances here on earth as our protectors. They have never been heard to speak a single word. Their communication with us and with each other is exclusively silent and telepathic. But from time to time, on the highest and holiest of holidays, all the angels in God's massive, blessed legion gather in the Hall of Voices and perform a concert of unparalleled worship, singing their adoration of the Creator in a vast choir whose only audible sounds are hymns of thanks for lives lived in His eternal presence. Part 6. Beyond the entrance, where we live, work, play, and worship. An accurate sketch of the other side can't be drawn without stressing that our laws of physics here are antiquated by comparison. So as difficult as I know it is, please try not to limit your images of home by confining them to the annoying, irrelevant, spatial constraints we're stuck with here. Housing. I still remember how relieved I was to hear from Francine that we actually have our own places to live at home. Even in paradise, the thought of wandering around without a space to call mine seemed so sad and lost that I wasn't sure that arrangement could ever make me truly happy. And practically speaking, we could live without houses on the other side. In fact, some do, even though, as we'll discuss momentarily, they could easily create them if they wanted to. Our bodies at home, real as they are much less low maintenance than they are here. We can assimilate food for the taste and experience of it if we choose, and prepare food if it's something we happen to like doing. But we don't need to eat or cook. We can lie down and rest if it's something we enjoy, but we don't need sleep. We have hearts that pump blood and lungs that breathe, and we have all other organs as well. Interestingly, they are located on the opposite side of our bodies from where they're located in our bodies on Earth, an exact mirror image of the human anatomy. We aren't inconvenienced, though, by what we'll politely call the earthier bodily functions, so we don't need a handy bathroom to dash to on even an irregular basis. We create our looks and our clothing with the same projected thought with which we created our houses, so we don't need wardrobes and closets and makeup and grooming supplies. And we certainly don't need protection from the elements in an atmosphere of a constantly calm and clear 78 degrees. In other words, there's really no pragmatic purpose to having a residence on the other side at all. And yet most of us do have houses at home, even if we visit them infrequently, for the simple reason that most spirits are naturally soothed and comforted by a place that's ours, an environment, no matter how elaborate or modest, that uniquely represents our lifestyle, preferences, and tastes, a space of singular familiarity whose doors we step through and immediately feel there. The other side itself offers its own sense of home, but creating a home within a home is an experience most of us deeply appreciate, just as we do on Earth. The facile answer to where do we live on the other side is anywhere we want. It also happens to be the truth, because houses there are perfect reflections of the residents' wishes. If you've always wanted to live in a looming stone castle, or a Tudor mansion, or a penthouse, or a gingerbread chalet, or contemporary split-level ranch, or a modest one-room log cabin, or a communal apartment, that dream is just a quick dimension away. It has nothing to do with what kind of housing you can afford, since there is no money at home, and certainly no concept of status or lack of it. What it has everything to do with is the fact that most of the houses on the other side are built by projected thought. Please don't misunderstand. Houses built by projected thought are not imaginary. Our understanding of the power of projected thought is still in its infancy on Earth. But if it helps bridge the credibility gap, remember that nothing human-made exists here that didn't start out as a projected thought. On the other side, we're simply able to jump from the thought to the reality without all the muss and fuss in between. It's not magic, it's a power of the mind. Again, a concept that we on Earth are only beginning to fathom. As important as houses are on the other side, though, they make up only a small fraction of the structures that gorgeously dot the topography and act as bustling centers of constant, exhilarating activity. Among the busiest, most treasured, and most prolific structures of home are the vast libraries, schools, research centers. They're everywhere, and they're as vital to our joy on the other side as our beloved friends and animals. The libraries are supplements of the Sacred Hall of Records, filled with every word ever published and every word being written on the other side that will one day be infused to writers on Earth for the benefit of humankind, on every subject imaginable, and many we have yet to fathom. These breathtaking collections of work offer infinite resources for literally anything that interests us, and there isn't a moment when every library throughout paradise isn't alive with eager activity. Structurally, the libraries are as varied and stimulating as the subject matter they house. To list their architectural styles would be to list every architectural style in existence, from small, modest wooden spaces with 1 or 2 rooms to sprawling contemporary glass monoliths with what seems like miles of spiral marble staircases, winding through floor after floor of shelves upon shelves towards symbolically wide open ceilings. As numerous as the libraries, as constantly populated, as architecturally diverse, are the schools and research centers where, we'll explore later, studies and experiments are eternally ongoing for the good of humankind throughout the universe, as well as for our own enlightenment, because, thank God, we are all created with minds that are infinitely curious and crave stimulation. One of the endless things we could and are slowly learning by infusion from home is that we do our best work and our most effective study in environments that combine beauty and serenity, where we look forward to going and are reluctant to leave. No matter how simple or complex the structures themselves are, cubicles, windowless walls, hard wooden seats, Cold linoleum floors and drab airless hallways are unheard of. Exposure to the magnificence of nature is integral to the design of every classroom and every research lab, and there is not a comfort of the most well-appointed home that isn't available to every student, professor, and researcher. No matter what the ambiance, we would flock to the schools and research centers out of just sheer passion. Their ambiance at home make us count them among our greatest joys. Worship. I often wondered, as you might too, if going to church regularly would be redundant on the other side, where God's adoration and presence fill every breath we take, and our adoration of Him motivates our every move. It turns out there is nowhere you can stand on the other side in which a house of worship isn't in view, and no structures are more cherished or more constantly filled with eager, joyful throngs. Magnificent temples, churches, and synagogues share the countryside with modest chapels, simple altars of every religion, all of which coexist in peace and profound mutual respect. We here on earth could take a lesson. These houses of worship are also great learning centers, and the residents of home find joy in educating themselves on the hundreds of rituals, customs, and theologies besides their own that share the same common goal, feeling, expressing, and uniting in their reciprocal adoration of God. Methodists and Buddhists happily and knowledgeably pray side by side at Judaic services. Catholics and Muslims are utterly comfortable singing hymns of praise with the Shinto monks and the Baha'i. Joining to glorify God hand in hand is natural, necessary and nurturing, as essential to our survival as a beating of our hearts. By whatever name we call Him, we're all praying to the same God. Now that we have some idea of what the other side looks like, we can start filling in the magnificent landscape with the equally magnificent and varied population we're homesick for, from the moment we leave them until the moment we return. Part 7, the locals. Who's waiting for us on the other side? Before I started intensely researching life in the love-permeated atmosphere of the other side, I had a vague image of a sea of wispy, vapor-like beings floating around hugging each other 24 hours a day. I don't know when I've been so relieved to be wrong. With the possible exception of an eternity of harp playing, can you imagine anything more unproductive, not to mention boring? It turns out that we have very real, very distinctive identities on the other side, with our own looks, our own personalities, our own interests, and our own preferences. It's true that there is a total acceptance at home, and no ego or aggression, but there are absolutely people we gravitate toward and away from. It's not that we dislike anyone, we just like some people more than others, without the added edge of human meanness on earth. We absolutely have bodies on the other side. We have eyes that blink, hearts that pump blood through our veins, and organs that are mirror images of our bodies on earth. The exact same placement, but reversed from left to right. I once asked Francine why we bother to keep our organs, when such bodily functions as digestion and waste eliminations are no longer necessary. She said because that's the way God created us. Fair enough. Similarly, I asked her about another fact. No matter what age we are when we die, we're all 30 years old on the other side. Why 30? Because we are. Francine is not an easy woman to argue with. Just as on earth, we each have a unique visage, or outward appearance at home. We come in all heights, weights, nationalities, hair colors, eye colors, and skin colors. What's fascinating is we can change styles according to our own tastes without ever losing our identities, and without spending a moment in a salon, at a makeup table, or under a plastic surgeon's scalpel, through the easy, powerful process of thought projection. Changing styles on the other side can include changing nationalities. Remember, there is no bigotry at home, which is one of the reasons they call it paradise. So if there's a look we like, we can assume it without worrying that it might subject us to discrimination. For example, before I came here for this lifetime, I adopted the appearance of an Asian woman on the other side, for no other reason than I had found it attractive. It didn't throw everyone into hopeless confusion about who I was, and I didn't have to run around reintroducing myself to my friends. People simply thought she's wearing her Asian look today. It's no different from people on Earth saying on Halloween night, "There's Aunt Rosie in a Marie Antoinette costume," or on Christmas, "Here comes Uncle Bob in his Santa Claus suit." While there is a lot of freedom in our ability to choose our visages on the other side, a few hard and fast rules apply too. One is that, as we mentioned earlier, we never retain any visible scars, injuries, marks of illness, or disabilities from our most recent lifetime. That only happens if we remain earthbound. Another, though, is that if we repeatedly abuse our bodies during an incarnation, for example, through chronic substance addiction, eating disorders, or excessive bodybuilding drugs, our bodies on the other side will reflect that abuse not as punishment but as a reminder we carry with us that we have more to learn about overcoming rather than indulging in self-destruction. Another rule about visages on the other side is that the more spiritually advanced we become, the more physical beauty we're given, as a badge of our progress and hard work. If you're ever wondered why we place such a high value on physical beauty on Earth, the answer is that, at home, it's the mark of a very elevated spirit. Forgive me for stating the obvious, but we would be wise to remember that the same rule doesn't apply here, and beautiful people in this dimension don't necessarily have an inside track on spiritual progress at all. Avoiding a language barrier. The population of the other side comes from every corner of the globe and every culture where every language is spoken, including those where no language is spoken at all. And yet, because we're all children of the same Father, nurtured in the same home, we communicate perfectly. And the native language on the other side is Aramaic. We've spoken it fluently since birth, and our memory of it fully returns the instant we arrive back home again. Our memory of every past life we've ever had fully returns too, as does our fluency in the language from every one of those past lives, and every other language we've ever studied on Earth and at home. Our knowledge is as vast on the other side as our eagerness to learn. So any dialect we don't already speak that captures our curiosity, we're able to quickly digest to perfection. We also make frequent use of our God-given ability to communicate by telepathy, the powerful silent transfer of thoughts, information, and wisdom directly from one mind to another. The most invaluable aspect of communication on the other side, whether it's by the spoken word or telepathy, is its total and complete clarity. We say exactly what we mean, and we mean exactly what we say. And of equal significance, we listen with unconditional love, trust, and compassion. There are no misunderstandings, no hidden agendas, or half-truths. No wondering after a conversation is ended how much of it we can really believe. 30 years old and absolute understanding between us and everyone we meet. How is that for something to look forward to? Our personalities on the other side. Imagine yourself at your finest moment, happy, at peace, filled with love, devoid of ego and resentment and aggression, your most positive qualities at their peak, and your most negative qualities melted away into non-existence. Then multiply that moment into eternity, and that feeling into infinity, and you'll have some idea of what you're like on the other side. No matter how many times we incarnate, how much we experience, and how much we spiritually progress, we are always us, that utterly unique combination of qualities we've been given that make us so fascinatingly distinct. Expecting to undergo a complete change in personality between here and the other side is like expecting to board a plane to Los Angeles, one person, and be someone else entirely when we step off that same plane in Hawaii. It just doesn't happen. Nor would we want it to. Our personality is part of our essence, part of who we are, and part of what allows us to recognize each other both at home and from our lifetime on Earth to another. Think of the people in your life one by one, whether or not you're convinced about the reality of reincarnation. Go through the simple exercise of asking yourself, if there were such a thing as past lives, have I ever known this person before? Take the first answer that comes to mind, whether it's yes or no. When it's yes, ask yourself if there wasn't something instantly familiar about them from the moment you met them, having nothing to do with their physical appearance, but some inner, one-of-a-kind blend of qualities that made you say, it's you, about a person who was supposedly, by the strict definition of the word, a stranger. That same recognition of singular qualities is what keeps us all so lovingly, eternally connected on the other side, with the added bonus that there we have total recall of every moment we've lived, both here and at home, so that there's no mystery of how and from where we know each other. If we all become blank slates, or just identical walking lumps of love, every time we make the transition from this dimension to that one, how on earth, or not on earth, would we ever recognize each other again? Why don't we always show up when a loved one calls us? This is an especially confusing issue when you add the fact that as spirits on the other side, we're able to bilocate, or literally be in two places at once. So why, especially when a loved one we left behind is pleading with us to appear, or just speak up, are we not able to accommodate them? One of the reasons is the basic human nature we carry with us from one dimension to the other. In any group of people, both here and on the other side, there are leaders and followers, spokespersons and listeners, extroverts and introverts. Those roles can change from time to time, just as we all have days on Earth when, for example, we happily answer the phone, and other days when we let the answering machine take a message, or simply ignore it completely, which has nothing to do with how we feel about the person who might be calling. There's no reason to assume that we instantly lose our occasional need for solitude on the other side, if it's been part of our nature all along. Also, as we discovered earlier, there are different processes we might go through in making our transition to the other side. Some of those processes take a very long time by earthly standards, and we can't assume our powers as spirits, including bilocation, until our transition back home is complete. Add to that the fact that we can't bilocate if we're earthbound, or obviously if we're already in utero, or underway in another lifetime on Earth, and it becomes less and less surprising that not all of our deceased loved ones can come running every single time we ask. Another fact of the spirit world is that some circumstances require us to be in our full essence, are totally present, and therefore temporarily unable to bilocate. For example, when I channel Francine so that she can speak through me, she has to be in her full essence for the duration of the trance. If we take on the responsibility of being someone's spirit guide when we return home, there will be times when they require our full essence too, and we'll be as briefly unavailable to our loved ones as Francine is to hers, while I'm channeling her. We also get to exercise a little selectivity on the other side about what calls from Earth to respond to. When I summon Francine for something urgent, she's right there for me every time. But if I want to ask her about tomorrow's weather, or where I put my car keys, she'll show up at her own convenience. She could easily be busy with any number of projects at home that take priority over my momentary trivia. Marriage and families. I've had enough family drama and enough marriages that I'm happy to announce that there is no marriage on the other side, nor are there families by the earthly limits of the word. And when you really think about it, I don't believe you'll be too unhappy about it either. On Earth, we define our families as those people with whom we share a common lineage. On the other side, we recognize that we all share a common lineage to God, which makes us all family. Not only does that give us an inherent respect for and sense of responsibility to each other, but it also gives us the freedom to form our own groups of intimate companions based on preference, mutual interests, and past life connections without the burden of genetic obligation that can cause so much resentment and forced intimacy here. Our recognition of earthly family members on the other side depends on the spiritual depths of those relationships. If you objectively scan your family with an open mind, I'll bet your soul will tell you who you've known before and who was and always will be just an acquaintance. For example, my father and I will pick right up where we left off when we're reunited back home as kindred spirits who have chosen to experience many lifetimes together and deeply love each other. My sister and I, on the other hand, will acknowledge each other on the other side as nothing more than former classmates in a way, who went to school together once and shared some experiences, but we won't feel compelled to pursue a friendship. We won't dislike each other. Again, dislike is a human-made, not a God-made emotion. She and I simply won't be drawn to each other, and will both be perfectly comfortable going our separate ways. Spirit guides. With the exception of dark entities who go through the left door when they die and come right back into utero again, every one of us on Earth has a spirit guide, a best friend from home who watches over us and advises us, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. Not only do we each have a spirit guide, but most of us will also be spirit guides for someone in the course of our soul's journey. It is an often painful, often thankless, always awesome responsibility, and it is the ultimate honor to be asked to take it on. Our relationship with our spirit guide starts on the other side with a sometimes slow-growing friendship. In fact, by all accounts, I wasn't quick to warm up to Francine when she and I were getting to know each other at home. I thought she was a little too authoritative, linear, and emotionally distant, and it speaks volumes about how our basic characters remain consistent, that I preferred friends who had more of a sense of humor. But by the time I made the decision to go through another incarnation on Earth, I knew that those same qualities would make her the perfect spirit guide for me. She would remain calm in the crisis-filled lifetime I had mapped out for myself. She would temper my drama with her sensible practicality. And she would be counted on to stand firm, be straightforward and plain-spoken, no matter how much I would argue with her, which has turned out to be a lot. In other words, like every effective spirit guide, she has assets that complement mine beautifully. Our spirit guide knows us better than we consciously know ourselves. I'll never forget Francine saying to me once, "I told you not to go back to Earth too early. You always get so bored in utero." Was I aware that I entered my body early this time around, let alone that I have a history of getting bored in utero? Hardly. When I say their knowledge of us is thorough, it's not an overstatement. One of the most common questions I'm asked is, if I have a spirit guide, why do they let me make so many mistakes and let so many bad things happen to me? Part of the answer came from Francine several years ago, when I complained to her about that very thing during an especially rough time in my life. She asked, "What have you learned from those times when everything went perfectly?" It's important but hard to remember that if we were looking for a smooth sailing perfection, we wouldn't be here. We would have just stayed in the divine bliss of the other side. We wrote a very detailed chart, our contract with God, before we came here, based on goals we hoped to accomplish, and we included some very difficult obstacles to overcome in pursuit of those goals. Our spirit guide's promise is to help us fulfill our contract with God, not to help us break it. Another part of the answer as to why our spirit guide doesn't intervene more often is that we sometimes just plain don't listen to them. You would think I wouldn't be guilty of that after 63 years of Francine constantly chirping away in my ear, being right time after time. But no, I still argue with her. Still am occasionally convinced that I'm smarter than she is, and still insist on being defiant every once in a while because I hate being told what to do. And sooner or later I invariably have to hear her say, "I told you so." and admit that yes, she did. If your spirit guide isn't as audible as mine, please don't assume you don't have one, or that they're not sending you frequent messages. Sometimes they speak through infused knowledge, or information transmitted directly from their mind to yours. Those things you suddenly know without having a clue how or why you know them. Spirit guides also speak loud and clear in ways we self-consciously try to explain away in terms we're more comfortable with, like instinct and premonition, and conscience and dreams, and something told me. Try exchanging all of those with the term spirit guide, and I doubt that you'll ever again complain that yours isn't sending enough signals. Angels. Angels really are their own separate species, created by God to be our messengers and protectors, His divine legion of activists. Unlike us, angels never incarnate, except for brief appearances on earth for our benefit. They are exclusive inhabitants of the other side. Unlike us, angels have no gender. They're universally androgynous. Their bodies and facial features are identical and exquisitely beautiful. Their skin and hair color vary to encompass the image of every race. But everyone who sees them, both on earth and at home, remarks on the fact that they all seem to glitter or sparkle, their essences always illuminated by the brilliant light of their Creator. Unlike us, angels never speak, even to each other. Their communication is exclusively telepathic, and not a single sound is ever heard from them, except when they're singing their magnificent hymns of praise to God's glory in the Hall of Voices. Unlike us, while angels do walk among the general population of the other side, they don't socialize, work, research, study, or participate in the gregarious, integrated lives we live at home. They stay to themselves, exuding their powerful love wherever they go, but not subject to the same range of emotions and varieties of personality that we are. Without ever looking grim or unfriendly, they never change expression, never smile, never frown, never laugh, and never cry, because they never experience any feeling except pure, uncompromised devotion. We will never become angels, nor will angels ever incarnate and become human. The reason is simply, we don't graduate from one species to another on the other side, any more than we do on earth. It's important to understand, though, that this does not mean that God loves or values angels any more than He does us, or that angels are better than we are. There is no such thing as better anywhere in God's creation, not within any one species, not from one species to the next, not in this world and not at home. We are all His children. We are all equally cherished by our Creator. We always have been, and we always will be. There are levels within the population of angels, depending on the extent of their experience. The more vast the experience, the higher the level, and the higher the level, the more powerful the angel. Angels earn advancement from one level to the next through their good works and the miracles they perform in God's name. Whether they're protecting us from harm, saving lives, or simply bringing us messages of joy, hope, comfort, and love, angels are truly God's mightiest, most direct link between here and the other side. His physical means of carrying us on His shoulders in times of fear, sorrow, and desolation, until we're strong and steady enough to walk beside Him again. I originally believed that there are 5 levels of angels, then only the second level, the archangels, have wings. I also believed that there were only specific duties assigned to each of those levels. I have learned from exhaustive study and a lot of long, very specific conversations with Francine that there are actually 8 levels of angels, that every one of them have wings. All 8 levels are charged with being God's messengers, protectors, and miracle workers for us on earth. The levels are physically distinguished from each other by the color of the wings, and the different colors are earned and worn as badges of advancement. in ascending order of power, not of importance, from the least to the most experienced and powerful. These are the 8 levels. Angels, their wings are a dusty grayish-white. Archangels, their wings are pure white. The cherubim, their wings are white with gold tips. The seraphim, their wings are white with silver tips. The virtues, their wings are pale blue. The dominions, their wings are green. The thrones, their wings are deep purple. The principalities, their wings are a solid, brilliant gold. The first 7 levels of angels are always at the ready, available to us in a heartbeat, sent by God, or taking the initiative themselves to intervene on one's behalf in a physical or emotional crisis. The 8th level, the breathtakingly powerful principalities, only come when we specifically summon them. At God's command and our truly heartfelt insistence, the principalities can create miracles and prevent fatalities, even if it means circumventing a chart to accomplish this. The Council. The Council, also known as the Elders or the Master Teachers, is its own phylum of 18 highly advanced male and female beings who essentially act as God's spokespersons on the other side. They are the exception to the rule of everyone at home being 30 years old. As an emblem of their revered wisdom and sanctity, their appearance is venerable, with long white silver hair softly framing faces of extraordinary beauty, unlined but mature. The men wear identical white silver beards, and both the men and the women dress in gracefully flowing robes. Like the angels, the 18 distinguished members of the council never incarnate, and their esteemed appointments to this body of elders last for eternity. The council presides in a vast white marble room in the Hall of Justice, at a gleaming white marble U-shaped table. A legion of gold-winged principalities stands sentinel behind them as a proud, silent testament to the council's awesome gravity. They are not a governing body, since government and laws are unnecessary on the other side, but because their wisdom is as vast and infinite as their love for us. They are entrusted by God with responsibilities that profoundly affect both life at home and our lives here on earth. Aliens. Let me make something very clear. I promise we are not the only inhabited planet in the universe. Assuming we are, because the other planets in our tiny solar system are uninhabited, is like sitting in a secluded house and assuming ours is the only house on Earth because we can't see any other houses through our front window. Does this mean I believe in the proverbial little green men? Not necessarily. I don't presume to know what all the beings on all the other inhabited planets look like, but I do know that we Earthlings are residents of this universe, and we're not little green men. So I've never quite understood what believing in one has to do with believing in the other. There are some brilliant people who are as convinced there is no life on other planets as I am convinced there is. They say, "Show me proof." I say the same thing. The minute I see photos of every square foot of every planet, of every solar system, and every galaxy, clearly showing that there's not another living being in a universe so vast we can't even invent a telescope capable of exploring it in detail, I'll be more than happy to rethink my position. Until then, I'll continue to be confident that we are not just privileged members of a global community, but members of a universal community as well. The residents of other planets are God's children, just as we are. They have the same journeys of the Spirit that we do, the same options of reincarnation, and the same joy on the other side. Not our other side, but their own, as identical to their planet as ours is to Earth. In other words, rather than sharing our other side with us, Every inhabited planet throughout the universe has a divine home of its own, each one blessed with the same help from its other side that we're blessed with from ours. Other planets' inhabitants have their own spirit guides, just as we do, their own legion of angels, their own council, their own sacred messiahs, and beyond any doubt, the same God who created us all. Mission life entities. Every one of us has a purpose, and each of our incarnation is a building block towards fulfilling that purpose. In our spirit minds, we know what that purpose is. Our spirit guide knows, the council knows, and of course, above all, God knows. There is no one purpose more important than any other. Just as we on earth need ditch diggers and bricklayers and teachers and paramedics and artists and charity volunteers, as much as we need kings and presidents, and that armies full of generals with no foot soldiers could never win a battle. Every purpose is indispensable and of equal value. One of the most advanced, not most important purposes we can sign up for is that of a mission life entity. Mission life entities have essentially said to God, wherever on this earth you need me, I'll be willing to go. They will sacrifice physical and emotional comfort and set aside any fear of the unfamiliar for the mission they're signed on for, not to convert or preach any specific religion or dogma, but to gently, compassionately rescue, reconnect, affirm, ignite, and celebrate the spirit of the divine in every child of God they encounter. True mission life entities respect differences in belief systems. They're kind, unprejudiced, and never ever superior. They don't frighten with threats of hell and eternal damnation. They don't intimidate. They don't claim to have an inside track to God that's not available to everyone else. They don't isolate or estrange anyone from loved ones or from the world in general. And they never lose sight of the fact that it is God, not them, who is the real answer. Mission life entities can be found pursuing any and every occupation. They fulfill their purpose through their innate generosity, openness, empathy, and most of all, their willingness to actively elevate the spiritual well-being of humanity without making annoying pests of themselves. It's not an especially enviable challenge, and it's certainly not for everyone. For one thing, mission life entities have to work their way up through the ranks, doing the reincarnation version of everything from stuffing envelopes to scrubbing the latrines, so that in the long run there's no level of life on earth that they can't relate to. For another thing, because they are such advanced spirits, they tend to write very difficult charts for themselves and choose extremely demanding themes and option lines, which we'll cover extensively in a later chapter. The path to achieving their purpose isn't just as full of obstacles as everyone else's, it's typically even more so. Mystical travelers. Mystical travelers can basically be described as mission life entities with a broader range. What they have said to God about their soul's journey is, wherever in this universe you need me, I'll willingly go. In other words, mystical travelers like mission life entities devote themselves to maintaining the divine spiritual connection between us and God as a thriving, viable force. But while mission life entities keep their sights focused on Earth, mystical travelers are available to incarnate and do their work on any inhabited planet in any galaxy where God needs them. Most mystical travelers have experienced many lifetimes on Earth and are ready to graduate from the learning process of reincarnating here. Volunteering to become a mystical traveler is very much like signing up for the postgraduate option of studying for their PhD. The face of God. An argument can be made that because God is actually a force, the great unseeable, the whole concept of his having a face or form is a moot point. But to make a very basic analogy, electricity is a force too, and it is very visible, no matter how briefly, when it arcs. And then there is the fact that trying to apply earthly laws of physics to God is too limiting to have any relevance at all. The truth is, both the Father God and Asna, the Mother God, who together make up the Godhead, do make brief and unspeakably sacred appearances on the other side, on the rarest and holiest of occasions, known to and observed by the whole population of spirits. Asna, the emotional dimension of the Godhead, appears more often and is more easily able to take on and maintain a form for several minutes. The revered statue of her in front of the Hall of Justice is an accurate depiction of her flawless long-haired beauty, sculpted by artists who were blessed enough to see her. The manifestation of God our Father, the intellectual dimension of the Godhead, is more like a brief, brilliant arc of electricity. He can only maintain the form of a magnificent face for a few short heartbeats, and even then the details of the image are too highly charged to be distinct and describable. But by all accounts, being in the fleeting presence of the visages of Asna and of God transcends divinity, transcends sanctity, transcends ultimate love, and sends a charge of the most hallowed awe to the very core of our spirit. Francine is not an emotional woman, but on the rare occasions when she even tries to express the impact of a physical manifestation of the Godhead, her voice catches and words fail her. And as she explains it, no word on earth in any language has ever been devised to describe this true epiphany, because we on earth have never experienced anything we can possibly compare it to. It is a privilege eternally reserved for the rarest moments on the other side. Part 8. Spending time on the other side. Now that we know we'll never spend a lonely moment on the other side, we can focus on how equally impossible it is to get bored. Frankly, boredom is a much scarier thought to me than death could ever be. And if there was nothing to do at home, I'd be tempted to rethink my position that the only place hell exists is right here on earth. It's important to stress again that when we go home, we're not arriving for the first time. We're returning to very full lives, stimulating occupations, studies and research we love, and hobbies we've missed during our brief trip to Earth. We pick up where we left off, doing everything we enjoy and enjoying everything we do, resuming not only our responsibility but also the brilliant socializing we could never quite accomplish or be fulfilled by while we were away. It's not said often enough, but I'm happy to make a special point of it here. We have fun on the other side. It wouldn't be paradise if we didn't. And believe it or not, one of the greatest sources of fun is studying. There's no doubt about it. We are much smarter on the other side than we are here. Our minds broaden again to their full potential when we get there. Memories of all our past lives and everything we learn during them come flooding back in an exhilarating rush, unblocked from the cluttered, chaotic boundaries of earthly consciousness. We're reunited with the timeless intellect that was our birthright from the moment our spirit was created, and it feels both thrilling and perfectly natural to reclaim it. But even with our God-given brilliance and an eternity to study, here and at home, it is a glorious fact that we will never learn everything that there is to learn. The description, all-knowing, is strictly reserved for God. So God gave us amazing minds, insatiable curiosity about subjects that interest us, and a universe so complex that it is impossible to exhaust any subject we choose. And on the other side, every imaginable course is available, except those that might in any way promote discord, harm, or violence, and taught by the most enlightened minds the world has known. Sometimes our areas of study reflect the careers and hobbies we enjoy on earth, but they can also cause distant yearnings in us here, that we can never quite satisfy it until we're back home again where we belong. The 7 levels of advancement. There is order to every aspect of God's creation, and that includes the growth of our spirits on the other side. The more we learn and experience, the more we grow. And the more we grow, the more advanced we become. Just as it's learning and experience that make the difference between a freshman and a senior in college, without one being any more valued in God's eyes than the other. Here are the basic descriptions of the 7 levels of advancement. Level 1. Our re-entry to the other side, including the reunion with our loved ones and our trip to the scanning machine. Level 2. Our orientation process, which, as we discussed, might involve cocooning, the towers, or whatever else will make our transition home as easy and peaceful as possible. Level 3. The physical and science skills, every vocation that is literally hands-on, from agriculture and animal husbandry, to botany, to chemistry, to carpentry, to forestry, to physics, to gardening, to geology, to marine biology, to stonemasonry. Level 4. The creative arts, including writing, sculpture, music, painting, and performing. Level 5. Research, in which all areas of progress are explored and passed along to Earth through infused knowledge. Level 6. The teachers, orientators, lecturers, and seminar leaders. Level 7. The level to which only a few rare souls choose to advance, where the spirit forfeits its identity and is willingly absorbed into the uncreated mass, or the infinite, unfathomable force field from which the love and power of God emanate. There is no segregation among levels, no uniforms, or any other visible way to tell by looking who is on what level. There is only constant mobility from any level to any other level we've graduated from. I happen to be an orientator on the other side on level 6, but I also love spending time in the animal husbandry centers on level 3 and doing archaeological research on level 5. Logically, that mobility doesn't work in reverse. We don't leap from level 3 to level 6, for example. Not because of snobbery, but simply because we haven't accumulated enough knowledge yet. Just as we don't leap from a freshman course into a senior course in college without taking those other 2 years of necessary courses in between. Level 7 is a phenomena and dimension all its own. Once a spirit has given itself to that ultimate level and becomes literally a part of God's unfathomable force field, it never returns to a previous level, an incarnation, or even its own identity. It doesn't cease to exist, it simply becomes absorbed into the most awesome of all energies. On a minuscule level, it would be like pouring a cup of water into the Pacific Ocean. Technically, that cup of water still exists, but it can never again be separated from the huge mass that consumed it. Francine once had a very brief glimpse through the veil, as she described the boundaries between dimensions into level 7. She could vaguely make out a few very indistinct physical forms, but she was so completely overwhelmed by the intensity of God's palpable presence that she quickly backed away before she fainted from it. Part 9, the return trip back to Earth from the other side. So there we are in paradise, surrounded by infinite beauty, walking side by side with the angels, the saints, busy and inspired, loved and loving, stimulated and stimulating, energized every moment by an atmosphere alive and electric with God's presence. And still, incredibly, most of us choose to leave the paradise of the other side from time to time for another incarnation in this harsh, rough dimension called Earth. Even more incredibly, that choice has nothing to do with masochism and everything to do with a very basic, indisputable fact. God created each of us with our own unique potential and a divine destiny to reach that potential. no matter how much time, pain, and sacrifice it takes. Ultimately, we never fail. We can't. Whether we run, walk, crawl, or wander off on 100 dead-end shortcuts, we will inevitably achieve the greatness that is our birthright, and our brief trips away from home are part of the path toward that greatness. As Francine once asked me, what have you learned when times were good? And times at home aren't just good, they're idyllic. True, on the other side, we can study every subject that exists, including negativity. But studying negativity without experiencing it and gaining the strength and wisdom that result from overcoming it is much like learning to drive a car by reading about it without ever getting behind the wheel, or believing you can perform brain surgery because you've memorized every available textbook on the subject. We never incarnate without very specific goals and challenges in mind, any more than we would head off to college without having a clue what school we're attending, what courses we're planning to take, and where we're going to live while we're there. And so in preparation for each lifetime, we go through a meticulous series of processes to guarantee that we accomplish what we're on earth to learn, and that we have all the help we need while we're here, if we'll just pay attention and listen. Just as we need orientation for a smooth transition to the other side, we also need orientation when we're leaving again. So once we've made the decision to return for another life on earth, we recruit our spirit guide and our orientation team, who immediately begin studying us and the general purposes we're interested in tackling. Our first official preparatory meeting takes place in one of the dozens of anterooms in the Hall of Justice, where we sit down with our spirit guide and the leader of our orientation team for an overview of the upcoming life we want to lay out for ourselves. I want to work on patience so that I can advance to level 5 and do research, we might say. Or, I'm hoping to become an orientator in the towers, but first I need to study more about healing. We discuss possible approaches, pitfalls, and alternatives to our intentions, including what we might have learned or missed about our subjects of interest in our past lives, and whether or not we can accomplish our goals without leaving the other side at all, and sparing ourselves the grueling challenges of another incarnation. Our spirit guide and our orientation leader, both of whom have spent lifetimes on Earth, understand how difficult and complex those lifetimes are. And while they're there to be supportive of us, they'll also make sure that we know exactly what we're doing and that it's what we really want. Once the general goals of our upcoming incarnations have been discussed and possibly modified on the advice of our spirit guide and orientation leader in the pre-orientation session, we proceed to one of the many chambers deeper inside the Hall of Justice, where the long, intricate process of orientation begins. The orientation room and the chart. Each orientation room is vast, made of white marble with white marble benches and tables, arranged to resemble a gleaming, pristine classroom. The towering walls are lined with maps, charts, lists, and other visual tools to help with the task at hand. We gather in our orientation room with our spirit guide, orientation leader, and the rest of the orientation team we've chosen, and with their help and the help of all the tools around us, based on our goals for our upcoming incarnation, we compose a chart in incredible detail for a life that will accomplish those goals. We start with the big picture, choosing the engines that will keep us moving towards the finish line we're determined to reach, no matter how many times we stumble and fall. The first of these engines is life themes. Life themes, one of the most remarkable lessons I've learned from my decades of doing hypnotic past life regressions, is that every person, everyone, has an immediate answer to the question, what was your purpose in that life? And from those thousands and thousands of people, the same answers keep coming up over and over again. The answers always fall into one of the 44 categories, which are so important that they provoke an instantaneous response 100% of the time when someone is asked to describe their purpose in life. We each choose 2 life themes, a primary life theme and a secondary life theme. Basically, the primary life theme defines the basic goal of our upcoming lifetime, while the secondary life theme defines the conflict we're setting up for ourselves to overcome. Because again, the harder we're made to work for something, the more we appreciate it. In this life, for example, my primary life theme is humanitarian. That is my purpose, what I set out to accomplish for my spiritual advancement. My secondary life theme, though, is the loner. That yearning for privacy and solitude has always been with me, threatening to pull me away from what I know I'm here to do. And not a day goes by when I don't have to fight the temptation to give in to it. But if my primary theme came easily, without my having to fight for it, my passion for it couldn't possibly run as deeply as it does. So one way to look at our 2 life themes is that the secondary theme is an obstacle to the primary theme. A more positive way to look at them, though, is that the secondary theme is a fire that lends heat to the primary theme and guarantees its success. Why bother to try to identify your life themes at all? Because through them you will unearth the real reason you choose to come here this time around, and a difficulty you choose to keep confronting over and over again until you beat it once and for all. And as an added bonus, you might even get a quick glimpse of yourself in that white marble orientation room, with your spirit guide and your orientation team by your side, studying the list of 44 in flowing gilt script on a gleaming white marble wall. Once the difficult task of selecting our primary and secondary life themes is accomplished, we move on to another list entitled Option Lines. Option lines. Have you noticed that no matter how well your life seems to be going, and how much of a handle you seem to have on things, there's always one specific area of your life you just can't master, no matter how hard you try or how much attention you pay to it? That one specific area is your option line, and it's another choice you made on the other side to tackle while you're here. If life on Earth is actually a very tough school, and it is, the option line is the course you've decided to major in this time around, and is your biggest area of challenge for this incarnation. There are 7 option lines to choose from: health, spirituality, love, social life, finance, career, and family. To give you an example, my option line is family. I was born to a warm, funny, wonderful, loving father and a neurotic, narcissistic, abusive mother. I spent my childhood trying to carve a Norman Rockwell family out of those raw materials, and I'm sure that my being psychic and very outspoken only complicated the household. But it was hard to create a feeling of coziness with a mother who regularly mentioned fantasies of stabbing you to death in your sleep, and a father who was understandably only half kidding when he said that the only thing that kept him from leaving his wife was the fact that it would mean he had to kiss her goodbye. I finally gave up my fairy tale in that household and proceeded to try to create my own family. With one husband who was abusive, another husband who sent me into bankruptcy, 2 sons I adore, who have different fathers and aren't exactly best friends, a mutual loathing with my brother-in-law, and at 63 years old, while the other 6 option line areas have had their ups and downs, but have never felt impossible, nothing can make me feel more inept, helpless, and just plain dumbfounded than that one area I still struggle with, called family. I wish I could promise that discovering your option line will lead you to overcoming it, but I've never known that to be the case. What it can do, though, is keep you from feeling ambushed every time yet another obstacle comes up in that same area you just can't seem to master. Expect the obstacles and be pleasantly surprised if and when they don't show up. And keep remembering, whichever of the 7 option line is yours, for what comfort it's worth, it's not a punishment or a burden some dark entity has cursed you with. It's a choice we make before we come here, a challenge we wanted to work on that will, I promise, make all the sense in the world to us when we're home again. Once our life themes and option lines have been selected, there is one more broad stroke that we, our spirit guide, and our orientation team will complete while creating this portrait of our upcoming incarnation. Aware as we are of exactly how grueling and often thankless life on Earth can be, we build 5 possible escape hatches into our charts. 5 opportunities to bail out and return to the other side. These are known as exit points. Exit points. Simply put, exit points are circumstances we arrange before we come here that can result in the end of this lifetime, if we choose to let them at that moment they occur. We write 5 of them into our charts, but we don't necessarily wait until the 5th one to leave Earth. We might decide at our first one, or our 2nd, 3rd, or 4th one, that we've accomplished all we need to on this trip and head home. And we don't space them out evenly when we plan them. We might arrange for 2 exit points in 1 year, for example, and then our next one 20 or 30 years later. The most obvious exit points include critical illnesses, serious accidents, near misses, and any other events that could result in death, but in the end don't, by luck. Other exit points, though, are so subtle that we might not even be aware of them. A decision for no reason to drive a different route than usual to or from work. Getting lost on a road we're perfectly familiar with. Trivial delays that keep us from leaving the house when we'd intended. Last-minute change in travel plans. Breaking a date or staying home from a party or an appointment because we suddenly just don't feel like it. Any number of incidents that seem utterly meaningless on the surface could easily be subconsciously remembered exit points that we've chosen not to take advantage of after all. Another occasional tip-off to a subconsciously remembered exit point is a recurring dream about a specific place, person, or situation that doesn't seem familiar but makes you feel uneasy or actually frightened, and then that dream gets played out in real life. Sometimes the dream is precognitive, but just as often it is a memory of an exit point you composed on the other side, and your feelings about it are a warning that it's on its way and you're about to have a choice to make. There's one more point that can't be stressed enough on this particular subject. With very rare exceptions, suicide is never, ever one of our exit point choices. We never write suicide into our chart. And our chart isn't just a contract with ourselves. It's a contract between us and God. Breaking that contract, unless it's caused by so severe a mental debilitation that is completely beyond our control, will send us right back in utero again next time around without spending a single moment in paradise. And I certainly can't imagine a life on this earth with my back turned to God. Can you? Filling in our chart's details. With the generalities of our charts decided on, the primary and secondary life themes, the option lines, and the exit points, we now begin the lengthy, arduous, painstaking job of composing each and every component and event of the lifetime we're about to undertake, to help guarantee that we have the best possible chance of succeeding at our overall goals. And the words each and every component are not used lightly. We choose our parents and our siblings. We choose every tiny aspect of our physical appearance, from hair, skin, and eye color, to body type, to height, to weight, including fluctuations, to any oddities and distinctive markings. We choose our exact place, time, and date of birth, which means that we choose all the details of our astrological chart. We choose our friends, our lovers, our spouses, our children, our bosses, and co-workers, our casual acquaintances, and even our pets. We even choose the dark entities we'll meet along the way. We choose the cities, the neighborhoods, and the houses we'll live in. We choose our preferences, our weaknesses, our flaws, our sense of humor or lack of one, our skills and talents, and our areas of incompetence. And step by step, breath by breath, we compose every important and trivial moment of the lifetime we're about to undertake. Despite how it sounds, we arrive on Earth with plenty of free will and countless choices. If it's in your chart that you skin your knee when you're 4 years old, it's up to you whether it will be a minor injury or end up requiring surgery. If your chart clearly states that you'll be invited to a birthday party at the age of 30, you can choose to decline the invitation or go and have a miserable time, or be the life of the party. If you plan a car accident for yourself, it can turn out to be a fender bender or a catastrophe that totals your car, depending on your choice at the time it happens. A charted illness can be life-threatening or trivial, as a result of whether or not you take care of it dutifully or ignore it when the illness strikes. When a dark entity shows up in your life, as dictated in your chart, it's your choice whether to walk away, get involved and let them destroy you, or get involved and profit from the experience by learning to keep your distance next time. A charted life is in no way a life without options. It exemplifies the fact that the value of our lives isn't dictated by what we're confronted with, but by what we do with what we're confronted with. Throughout the process of composing the chart, our spirit guide faces an incredibly difficult challenge. They have to draw on all of their own past life memories and emotions in order to become, in a way, almost humanized on our behalf. Don't forget, our state of mind on the other side, including when we're in orientation to return to Earth, is euphoric, fearless, and utterly confident. There's nothing we feel unequipped to handle, nothing we're reluctant to take on in our hunger for spiritual growth. Composing our chart in this state of mind is a bit like going to the grocery store with an empty stomach and a full wallet. We'll drag home twice as much food as we can possibly eat before it spoils, much of which is junk that is only going to make us sick or fat or both if we don't come to our senses and throw it away. However burdensome your life is, I promise that you are in the process of opting for even more challenges than you're already faced with, until your spirit guide argued you into something at least a little more realistic. We're given proof during our lifetimes on Earth, if we're paying attention, of how intricately detailed our charts are by the time we're finished composing them. For example, we'll all occasionally experience little moments, almost invariably trivial, that we fleetingly believe is an exact replica of a moment we've lived before. The feeling lasts for only a second or two, and it's some version of, I've sat in this chair, in this position, drinking coffee from this cup, with the phone ringing, interrupting the news on TV, precisely like it is now, once before. Either silently or out loud, we acknowledge that we've just experienced a déjà vu, and then shrug it off and go on with our day. The truth is, we haven't lived that moment before at all. We wrote that tiny, inconsequential moment into our upcoming life during orientation as a subtle signpost to let us know that we're in sync with the lifetime we planned before we came here. Déjà vu is actually a rare signal, resonating from our subconscious to our conscious mind that says, I remember the chart I wrote, a brief, blessed glimpse of home. Once we've completed the long, arduous task of writing our chart, based on such decisions as our goals, life themes, and option lines, we leave the orientation room and, with our spirit guide, proceed to the heart of the Hall of Justice, to the magnificent white marble sanctity of the vast arena where the council sits at their gleaming U-shaped platform waiting to receive us. The council's role in preparing us for our upcoming trip to Earth is critical. They demand that we rethink our life themes, the potential crises we've written in, and every other area of our goals that might cause us so much pain that we'll miss the point of what we're hoping to accomplish. Again, even with our spirit guide's effort to keep us from taking on too much, we're still likely to present the council with an unrealistically ambitious chart. And in their wisdom, they'll talk us through every step, asking questions and invariably advocating modifications for our own good. If they find it necessary, the council will scan any number of other lives for us in which the same themes were operating as examples, for better or worse, or how the challenges we intend to take on have been handled before. As if our absolute reverence for the wisdom of the council weren't enough, the opportunity to literally watch the consequences of our choices before we finalize them is crucial. Almost without fail, between scanning these other lifetimes and taking the council's protective, loving encouragement, we do end up making adjustments to our charts here and there to maximize the value of the lessons we have our hearts set on learning during our time on Earth. One bit of misinformation I'd like to clear up right now is a theory that when someone is living a life of extraordinary challenges, it's their punishment for some horrible act they committed in a past life. Actually, the truth is almost the opposite of that idea. When the council approves an especially difficult chart, they're expressing great faith in the advancement of the spirit who wrote it and saying, "We know you're special enough to handle this, and we agree that your purpose for taking on these obstacles is worth the sacrifices you'll be making." In other words, extraordinary challenges typically indicate the council's high regard, not their long-awaited chance to act as a grudge from your previous incarnation. Our final act in the sacred presence of the council, once our chart is complete and modified, is to recruit the special help that will be assigned to protect us throughout our upcoming lifetime. Help in the form of angels. Depending on the difficulty of our life themes and chart, we might be given, let's say, 2 angels, 2 archangels, and 1 of the principalities, which, as we discussed, are the big guns of God's legion. I think it speaks volumes about how much more of a challenged life on Earth is becoming in general, as we continue to abuse this planet and each other, that people are arriving from the other side with more and more angels accompanying them. It used to be common for me to see only 1 or 2 angels with most people. I now never see fewer than 2 around anyone, and as many as 5 or 6 counting such levels of angels as archangels, dominions, or thrones around those advanced souls who are here for their last incarnation. We don't leave the council, and the perceptible presence of God manifests in every audience with them, until our chart is complete and modified, and until we've secured our own blessed protectorate of angels. From there we proceed to the towers for yet another challenge in the process of leaving home. Part 10. Saying Goodbye. The gathering of our dear friends, including our spirit guide, in the towers to bid us farewell isn't so much a sad occasion as it is a subdued one. We all know that our time away from the other side is going to be brief, the blink of an eye in the context of eternity, and that we'll all be busy, occupied, and still close enough to each other to feel the conspicuous pain of missing each other. But we're also aware of another indisputable truth of incarnating. The moment we return to Earth, we will have few, if any, conscious memories of home, our thrilling, ecstatic lives there, and our beloved friends. In fact, it's entirely probable that we'll doubt their existence altogether, and not even feel their arms around us through the joys and the sorrows we've designed for ourselves while we're gone. They wish us a successful journey, and they pray we remember home as best we can, if we can. And then they do something we and they know is just a necessary part of our leaving. They pull away from us. It's not an act of rejection or cruelty. but the act of great kindness and respect, as difficult for them as it is for us. The reason they pull away is simply that if they didn't, if they held on to us and made their perfect love for us an overwhelming issue, we might very easily lose our will to go through the tough growing experience we've determined we need and just stay with our cherished friends in God's paradise forever. Not once do they question our decision to undertake another lifetime or ask us to explain the reasons for it. They love us so much that they stand back and let us go, with a promise to be with us every step of the way, cheering us on in voices we probably won't even hear. Then we have the unspeakable divine privilege of 2 private audiences after we've said farewell to our friends. The first is with our Messiah. Every Messiah who incarnated to bring the message of God to earth is alive, active, and deeply treasured on the other side. From Jesus to Buddha to Mohammed to Baha'u'llah to Apollonius of Tyrannia to all the other great spiritual leaders this world has been privileged to know. They don't live among or socialize with the general population, but they give lectures and seminars, offer counsel, and continue the work they did here, of being the most sacred, loving, highly advanced teachers God has created. Before we return to earth, we are given several moments with the Messiah to whom we've always felt closest, at a site of our own choosing. Many prefer the private familiarity of the orientation center, but I chose to spend my brief sacred time with Jesus in a hushed enclave of roses in the gardens of the Hall of Justice. Whoever the Messiah and whichever the location, they are there to embrace us in their divine light, knowing from their own singular experiences the trials and heartaches that await us on earth, and reminding us, aware as they are that we'll still forget sometimes, that there will never be an instant when their presence is not with us. Their message is simple and profound, especially when life seems at its most unfair and your faith is darkened by the cruelty of human doubt. Even if you don't remember me at those moments, I am right beside you always, my strong hand taking yours and guiding you through. The second audience is an awesome glimpse of the actual materialized presence of Asna, the mother god, the exquisite, perfect emotional half of the deity who created us, whose mere glance reconfirms our eternal place in her heart as her cherished child. First our Messiah, then Asna, each bless us, receive our prayers, and promise us a safe trip home, again into the unparalleled love of their eternally open arms. And we leave them, adored and adoring, filled to overflowing with humble, reverent joy. We now proceed to one of the glorious, peaceful departure rooms in the towers, where the dawn-dusk pastels of the atmosphere filter through the blue glass facade to quiet our anticipation of this trip we've chosen. Our orientation leader is there waiting for us, skilled, calming, and infinitely loving, ready to send us on our way. We lie down on a smooth, comfortable table covered with soothing, warm blankets. Our chart is still firmly fixed in our mind, our destination chosen, our body taking form in the womb of the woman we've selected as our biological mother on earth. We're eased into a twilight sleep, and the process of descent begins. I hope you'd never get tired of hearing me say that I love knowing there is always more to learn, because I'll probably still be saying it with the last breath this body takes. Until a few short months ago, I believe Francine and I had covered every aspect of our descent from the other side to Earth. But then I learned that spirits preparing to descend into a body were actually getting smaller. This was news to me. Somehow I had always assumed that we're in a 30-year-old body, and then proof we're in utero, and I hadn't given it any more thought than that. Francine informed me, of course spirits physically diminish in size when they descend. I wonder why she never bothered to mention that before. For the millionth time she replied, "If you don't ask the question, I can't give you the answer. You'd be amazed at how much time I spend trying to think of questions, and I've still only scratched the surface." And so as our spirits physically diminish in size, another parallel with the process of death occurs. A tunnel rises from our etheric substance, again across, not down, and it's through that tunnel that we descend the 3 short feet from the dimension of the other side to the womb that waits for us on earth. Much like when we suffer a severe illness or injury that causes us to lapse in and out of consciousness when we die, our spirit is in and out of its embryo many times before we're born, so that our re-entry is not abrupt enough to cause us too severe an emotional and spiritual shock. Based on our comfort zone in utero from past lives, our spirit guide has suggested how early or late in the pregnancy to make our final entry. Ideally, we listen. I didn't. I defied Francine, entered too soon, and was bored silly by the time I was thrust into this world for the 54th time. But no matter how early or how late we finally make our full transition from home to the womb, we each experience the finest, holiest moment of grace imaginable. The last thing we feel before we leave the other side for each new, daunting, courageous lifetime is the actual touch of the finger of God, just above the bridge of our nose where our third eye would be. It is God's kiss, not of goodbye, but only of a brief farewell, knowing we're leaving paradise, not just for the sake of our own spiritual potential, but for Him as well, and assuring us, His children, that His perfect, unconditional, eternal love will light our way through all our days on earth and right back through the tunnel that will someday bring us safely home again.